Good evening. I would like to call to order the February 23rd, 2026 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that all board members are present, and we have two of our student reps, Sarah and Humsini. The board values public participation and engagement in the meetings of the board. Board meetings will continue to be live streamed on the LWSD website and are available for viewing following the conclusion of the board meeting as well. The public are always welcome to email the board at boardmembers@lwsd.org. First up is our land acknowledgement. Sarah, would you like to read that for us?
The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District acknowledges that our district is on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples, who have reserved treaty rights on this land, including the Duwamish and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived here since time immemorial. We commit to continue collaborating with our Native community to teach the indigenous history of this land and these local tribes to all children of the district. We also commit to provide the best possible education for all children of Native descent who attend our schools.
I will now entertain a motion to approve the February 23rd, 2026 agenda.
So moved.
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director Yoakum and seconded by Director Meekhoff to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We are going to start off tonight with a recognition for Educational Support Professionals Week. Director Meekhoff.
Whereas education support professionals are involved in nearly every aspect of education, including maintaining school buildings and grounds, providing secretarial and clerical assistance, preparing and serving meals, providing safe transportation, keeping school facilities clean and orderly, assisting in the classroom, providing a secure and healthy environment, and many other specialized services, and whereas education support professionals are instrumental in fulfilling the state's responsibility to educate all students. And whereas these dedicated individuals deserve recognition and thanks for the outstanding work that they are doing for the students enrolled in Lake Washington School District. And whereas by supporting the learning environment, education support professionals are crucial partners with teachers, parents, administrators, and school boards in public schools. And whereas there are approximately 1,500 classified school employees working with and helping children in the Lake Washington School District. Therefore, the Board of Directors do hereby proclaim March 9th through the 13th, 2026 as Education Support Professionals Week in the Lake Washington School District.
Thank you. Next, we have another recognition of our National Board Certified Teachers. Emily Young is going to present.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Holman and LWSD School Board for having us here tonight to celebrate and recognize the 24 incredible educators who have attained National Board Certification this year. We are so proud of all of you, and thank you to those of you who could join us here tonight. We are thrilled that you were able to come even on a school night. Also would love to thank our Lake Washington Education Association representatives. Thank you for your partnership in celebrating our honorees tonight and providing the delicious cake that we were able to enjoy before the meeting. It is much appreciated. Finally, thank you to our audience and all of the family members and friends who are able to join our educators tonight. We're so glad that you could be here with us to celebrate the educators this evening. Hang on, I thought we had some slides here. Nope.
Sorry, the slides are not.
Nope, okay, that's fine. We can just talk through it. So the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards Certification is a process that invites teachers to engage in deep reflection and thinking about student learning. It is something that is often considered to be rigorous. Some might say arduous as a process. It can take 1 to 5 years. And I am seeing some of our educators who are here tonight nodding fervently about how much it requires of you. And it does that because it requires teachers to do classroom videos, to engage in deep reflection about their students, about their their own learning, about the assessments that their students take, to gather classroom portfolios. It really is a very in-depth process, and it is actually supported by research as well. There are studies that show that students in a classroom taught by a nationally board certified teacher actually learn more than students in other classrooms. So it is considered the highest level of professional certification that a teacher can achieve, and we're incredibly proud of the educators who have attained the certification this year, and of course in past years as well. So this evening, we are thrilled to have the opportunity to recognize those of you who've attained certification this year. Lake Washington is deeply committed to the process of helping teachers reflect and grow their practice through national boards, and so we have 2 facilitators who are able to help educators who wish to go through that process, Julie Vasiliauskas as well as Fariha Nasir. We have Julie here with us tonight to help welcome our educators who are able to join us, and she will be inviting you up and will present you with your award, and then we will recess outside afterwards to do a little photo. Julie?
It is my great pleasure to celebrate all of the new NBCTs who just certified, as well as our maintenance of certification teachers who are already NBCTs. Because even though it's such a rigorous process at the beginning, every 5 years we must recertify and show our accomplishments with a slightly less arduous process, but continuing to maintain very high levels of achievement and work for our students. Myself am an NBCT since 2010, so I know what you have all been through. Being a facilitator now for several years, running the district's program, it is wonderful to see all of you grow into analytic and reflective, accomplished teachers. I had to slip that in there. So as we recognize you, please come up to receive a certificate. And then just stand to wait for everyone so that we can also recognize all of you all at once at the end. So our first NBCT that is newly certified in the area of early childhood generalist is Carrie Farron. Our next NBCT, certifying in early and middle childhood literacy, reading, and language arts, Elizabeth Hanna. Certifying in early and middle childhood English as a new language, Jody Howerton. Certifying in early adolescence through young adulthood, English as a new language, Jessie Ree. An NBCT who's maintaining their certification in early adolescence, English language arts, Dina Kernish. Another NBCT who is maintaining their certification in adolescence and young adulthood in science, specializing in chemistry, Brian Schneer.
Yes, the board will now pause for a brief recess and resume at 7:15. The next item on the agenda will be public comment. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District welcomes the public to the business meetings of the board and encourages community engagement. The board dedicates 30 minutes to hear from the public during the public comment period of the meeting, with each individual provided up to 2 minutes to speak. Participants should not expect a response from the board at the end of their comments, as we dedicate this time to listening to your voice and would like to get as many members of the public an opportunity to speak as the time allows. If you have materials you would like distributed to the board, please leave them in the basket next to the podium. Each speaker will be called to the podium in the order of sign-up. A timer will appear on the screen showing your remaining time. When you have 30 seconds left, the timer will turn yellow to let you know you're nearing the end. When 10 seconds remain, the timer will turn red as a signal to wrap up your remarks. Please note that the microphone will be turned off shortly after your time expires, so we ask all speakers to conclude when their time is complete. I'd like to also remind everyone here this evening that this opportunity to engage in dialogue is also an opportunity to model respectful discourse to our students and our community. We ask that the audience refrain from commenting and from prolonged applause following each comment, as it takes up time and prevents us from listening to as many speakers as we can fit into our dedicated 30 minutes. Once the public comment portion of our business meeting concludes, we ask that everyone who is not interested in listening to the rest of the agenda items exit quietly and in an orderly fashion so that we can continue the rest of our meeting. Members of the public can sign up to participate on the district website. Sign up closes at noon on the day of the board meeting, and comments will be offered in the order of sign up. Speakers can designate another person to speak in their place in advance of the noon deadline, but speaker substitutions at the meeting unfortunately cannot be accommodated. As a reminder, the board does not discuss personnel matters at board meetings. Members of the community are encouraged to attempt to resolve issues with teachers, school principals, and other district personnel before bringing issues to the board. Additionally, speakers should refrain from naming students unless they are the parent or guardian of said student. Public comment will now begin at 7:17 p.m. The first speaker is Alex Lee.
Good to see you all, directors. I'm Alex Lee with Cascadia College. I'm a trustee at the college and just giving you an update on what's going on with Cascadia. Enrollment continues to move upward at double digits. We had an 11% increase over the last winter, and Cascadia is only one of 3 community colleges that continue to see this kind of growth. Cascadia served 161 Lake Washington Running Start students in the fall of 2025, and Cascadia is currently serving 167 Lake Washington Running Start students in winter of 2026, or 2025-2026. And the college team has been meeting with Lake Washington School District's high school principals to develop partnerships which can better serve the schools better. This is exciting new work and helps meet each school's specific needs. Dr. Murray toured board members Richter and Meekoff around campus on January 23rd, and we appreciate that interest and investment in us. Dr. Rania Hussain, electrical and computer engineering faculty and vice chair of the University of Washington Seattle Faculty Senate, has joined us as a trustee. We welcome this new perspective. And the Cascadia and Lake Washington Student of Color Conference is being planned, and we're excited to have the high school students back to campus for the 4th year in a row to experience workshop and college life. As well, we're working with Lake Washington School District staff to have information available about historically Black college and universities at the conference. The legislature is considering reducing the number of courses Running Start students can take. Our state board and OSPI are against this. We ask your assistance, as well as parental assistance, to reach out right now to state legislatures about how much this will hurt the ability for some students to engage in Running Start. When the legislature,
wrap up your comment, please.
When the legislature approved this increase 3 years ago, we saw a 400% increase in Running Start students during the summer. This students who have barriers really need this opportunity. And this increase will not cost students, the school districts, any money. It's a special $14 million allocation. So thank you.
The next speaker is Christy Cowan. Christy, no? Next speaker is Robert Ragno.
2 weeks ago, I presented a set of specific conflicts between district practice and state law for this district's highly capable identification process. Tonight, I want to address something the board may not be aware of regarding the oversight that's supposed to catch such problems. The district's Accelerated Programs Department has repeatedly assured me, and I'd imagine this board, that they are in frequent contact with OSPI and are fully compliant. I want to explain what that actually means in practice. Each year, the district's highly capable coordinator fills out a Smartsheet checkbox survey and submits it to OSPI. It contains so little detail that you could not significantly confirm compliance with it. But OSPI has no verification step. There is no audit, there's no investigation. OSPI's highly capable program office confirmed to me directly that they do not investigate district compliance. Their words, "We're not enforcers." They explained they consider the school board to be responsible for ensuring compliance. That same survey then comes to this board after the school year it covers has nearly ended as a consent agenda item, and you approve it retroactively. That is the entire oversight process. No one at any level is examining whether what the district reports is accurate. When staff tell you they're compliant, the basis for that confidence is a system where compliance is self-reported and never checked. My compliance analysis identified specific practices that conflict with specific provisions of RCW and WAC. The refusal to assess referred students, rejection of all non-school evidence, absence of newly enrolled identification process, denial of appeal. No one at the district, no one at OSPI, no one at the Office of the Education Ombuds has disputed a single point. I understand this board relies on staff expertise, and that's normally the right approach. I'm not asking this board to take my word for it. I'm asking you not to take staff's word for it either, because the system that's supposed to verify their claims does not actually do so. Thank you.
This concludes public comment. Thank you to those that participated and attended to engage with the board. As we move forward with the meeting, if you decide to remain at our meeting, we ask that all attendees are respectful and honor standard meeting protocols. Keeping side conversations to a minimum and voices at the lowest level possible is expected of all attendees. If you decide to leave at this time, please do so in an orderly and quiet manner so the board can continue their business meeting. Again, thank you for coming and participating in the meeting this evening. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the February 23rd, 2026 consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Meekhoff and seconded by Director LaLiberty. Superintendent Holman, will you please poll the board?
Yes, Director Yoakum,
Yes.
Director Richter,
Yes.
Director Meekhoff,
Yes.
Vice President LaLiberty,
Yes.
and President Guthrie.
Yes, motion carries. Superintendent Holman, will you please review the donations?
I will. So tonight in the board's packet, you have over $66,000 of donations to our schools, 3 PTSAs and 2 boosters, PTSAs at Meade, Rockwell, ICS, and 2 booster clubs at Lake Washington High School supporting the track and music programs. And we just want to say thank you to those donors in those groups for continuing to support our schools, our programs, and providing unique opportunities for our students.
Thank you. Dr. Holman, do you or staff have a legislative update?
We do. Tonight we have what we call mid-session update, so it's a little bit longer of a presentation, kind of digging into the legislative platform and things like that. Associate Superintendent Posthumus will provide that report, and then I have a couple remarks for the board related to the budgets that were released over the weekend.
All right, thank you very much. As Dr. Ullman said, we're going to provide a mid-session update, kind of where we are with our legislative priorities. Just a reminder, our priorities, the big three, are still our higher priorities. That includes fully funding special education, adjusting material supplies and operating costs, or MSOC, and updating the transportation funding formula to provide clarity and predictability for school districts. As a reminder, our special ed expenditures represent almost $90 million of the district budget, and state and federal dollars only cover a portion of these costs. The shortfall in special ed is approximately $22 million, and we've been asking our legislature to close the gap. So as far as what's been happening so far this session, unfortunately, there has been no movement in the big three categories. So there's been no proposals relating to special education funding this year. The legislators feel satisfied that last year's increases to the multiplier and safety net threshold were enough. As a reminder, those increases, while helpful for Lake Washington, worked out to about $2.9 million, which is barely a dent in our $22 million shortfall. Senate Bill 5918, which was introduced by Senator Wellman, did propose another increase to MSOC. We estimated it would give Lake Washington about $3 million in funding. And Senate Bill 5858, also by Senator Wellman, would have restored the transportation safety net for special passengers. Our district received $300,000 to $400,000 over the last 2 years, but that was eliminated last year. Unfortunately, both of these bills stalled after coming out of the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education committees. The other area that we've been working on, this is to simplify construction funding and updating the non-voted debt rules to be consistent with other capital funding rules. This is our third legislative session that our coalition of districts have focused on passage of the front funding bill. So just some, again, details on that. House Bill 1796 was introduced by Representative Callan. It moved through the House with no amendments and had its first Senate hearing last week. Both Dr. Holman and Director Guthrie testified. An executive session in the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education is scheduled for tomorrow. It does still have to go through Senate Ways and Means this week and then have a Senate floor vote. As we've shared, we've been in touch with Senator Trudeau to work through her concerns about the bill's impact on SCAP funding, which there really isn't any. We provided amendment language to delay the distribution of SCAP language that we hope would be acceptable to her. If the bill is amended in the Senate, as we expect, it will have to go back to the House for concurrence before the end of the session. And then there was a Senate Bill 5095 by Senator Dingra, did not move at all this session, but that's what we expected because it was they've agreed to make the House bill the vehicle for passage. So some of our other, what we're calling persistent needs, there's been really no attention to simple majority or staffing allocations, but we have had a lot of conversations and opportunity to talk about unfunded mandates. So I've got kind of 3 slides regarding unfunded mandates. There's, minimizing unfunded mandates has been a priority for years, but this year it feels like our legislators are finally understanding the issue and at least responding. Unfunded mandates mostly fall into 2 categories, those with cost implications and those with workload impacts, but sometimes it is both. And they're often difficult to quantify. So I'm not going to go read through all of these, but I want to highlight Senate Bill 2160 and House Bill 5883, which would expand access to SEB benefits for substitute teachers. While this is a well-intentioned bill, providing health care to additional substitutes, the challenge is that it's already unfunded. It's currently unfunded. And then Lake Washington pays about $4 million more than the state provided last year for all of SEB. And this expansion would cost the district an additional $1.3 to $1.6 million, and there was no additional funding in this bill. So we let our legislators know that information. Neither bill made it out of the Chamber of Origin, though we have heard kind of rumblings that Representative Berquist might try to revive it as necessary to the budget. The other House Bill 2594 is another, we're calling this an unfunded mandate. It really codifies kind of the federal McKinney-Vento requirements into state law. So our federal government requires certain supports called McKinney-Vento. There is no funding from the federal government. The state now wants to make it state law, and what we're saying to the state is if you're going to make it a state mandate, then you need to fund it. So that's kind of the feedback we're providing. Some other unfunded mandates related to workload, and again, these are hardest to quantify, but it really means that existing staff, if these bills would pass, existing staff need to reallocate time, potentially taking away from other responsibilities, or in the extreme, districts would have to add resources, but then that would require reductions elsewhere. So just a few examples. Senate Bill 5841 initially required all students to complete a financial aid application or provide a waiver from their parents as part of the high school and beyond plan. We shared concerns that staff time would be taking up chasing down applications or waivers, but thanks to advocacy, the bill was amended to address these concerns and eliminate the requirement. House Bill 1634 did not explicitly mandate new district duties, but would likely call for staff administration and coordination time. So the bill is still advancing in the Senate. So finally, there are a few unfunded mandates in the curriculum area. These are, again, a mix of definite and unknown costs. So these bills are all proposals that would impact curriculum purchases and require staff time and training. House Bill 1295 and Senate Bill 6192 in particular would have required significant investment in new curriculum and a multi-year implementation with teacher training and ongoing support. Just as a reference, a day of training for elementary teachers alone is approximately $500,000. Each of these proposals would require multiple days of training over multiple years. 3 days of training for House Bill 1295 alone would cost $1.5 million. An elementary ELA or math curriculum could be approximately $3.5 million. As of now, only House Bill 1295 is still moving, and it's been amended to lower the price tag and postpone any impacts. So some of these growing needs are newer priorities and require funding. And going into this session, we didn't really expect to spend much time on these because the legislature isn't in a position to make big investments. But still, we wanted to note there were a few bills of note. Evidence-based literacy. 2 bills were introduced. House Bill 1295, which is using evidence-based instruction practices in reading and writing literacy. It would require districts to comply with new evidence-based instruction standards when they next adopt literacy, reading, and writing curriculum for grades K-5. Between curriculum adoption and, again, professional development, this would come at a hefty cost. Senate Bill 6192 concerning instruction and intervention in reading and mathematics, built on House Bill 1295 by applying to reading and math instruction for K-12 students, along with specific interventions for students struggling in any of those categories. This bill did not make it out of the Senate. We have testified on both bills to explain the necessary investment and provide examples of other states who have made big investments recently. All right, now we have something called the kitchen sink bill. We tried to think of another name for this bill, but really it's a bill, it brings together multiple unrelated items. So that's why we're referring to it as the kitchen sink. And unfortunately, it cuts resources for school districts in several areas, and really is the state's way saying they want to be more efficient, but it's really meaning they're cutting resources to districts. One of the proposals is extending the bus depreciation schedule. Currently, our smaller, shorter buses are on an 8-year schedule, where our large passenger buses are on a 13-year schedule. So this bill would extend all buses to a 15-year depreciation schedule, reducing state depreciation funds to districts. We're estimating the impact to Lake Washington is a minimum of $150,000 annual cut to our transportation vehicle fund, and that's the equivalent of replacing one bus. This would also increase our maintenance costs due to keeping older aging buses on the road longer, and it would also impact, obviously, sustainability efforts. The House budget proposal released yesterday would further impact depreciation schedules by removing federal grants and rebates for electric bus purchases from the depreciation formula. So if you receive a bus from a federal grant, it wouldn't be eligible for depreciation. So that's something new in the most recent House budget. And as you know, our district just received 4 buses through these federal grants. And so that, again, conflicts with the state's commitment to environmental sustainability. And then the other item in the kitchen sink bill is reducing Running Start enrollment from 1.4 FTE to 1.2 FTE. So that impacts our students who have an interest in attending Running Start. And then a universal high school and beyond platform was approved in 2024. And development of that platform is in the works now. The original version of this bill authorized OSPI to hold back a percentage of our MSOC funding for grades 9 through 12 to pay for these licenses. It was removed from Senate Bill 6260, but remains in the House budget proposal. So the good news is the bill actually missed the February 9th fiscal committee cutoff, but was resurrected last week. The bad news is it was resurrected last week as necessary to implement the budget. So we are continuing to watch this and will provide comment. All right, almost done. Some other bills that are still advancing. Again, we don't just testify on bills that fall under legislative priorities. Some of the other bills we've gotten involved with this session. Senate Bill 6351 is the latest bill to address last year's sales tax expansion that, at the last moment impacted school districts and will require Lake Washington to spend a minimum of $1.5 to $2 million in unfunded costs. So we have been advocating with our legislators that they need to pull school districts out of this, and it had its first hearing in Ways and Means last Thursday, and committee members did seem optimistic about it. The other bill, 2320, prohibits the manufacturing of certain firearms and components using 3D printers, as well as the sale of digital firearm manufacturing code. It was introduced by Representative Salahuddin, who asked us to testify in support of this bill. It was heard in the Senate Law and Justice last Friday. So House Bill, and then next, House Bill 2557 ensures that parents receive special education evaluation reports with enough time to read them before placement meetings. We agreed that this was a good policy and testified in support. The executive session for this bill is scheduled Wednesday. And finally, House Bill 2459 allows school districts to build schools outside the urban growth area. While we aren't immediately planning any schools built on property outside the urban growth area, we do have property outside the urban growth area. There are other school districts that this would benefit, and so we have testified in support of that proposal and to support those other districts. Senate Bill 6263 is a bill that would have actually saved staff workload by adjusting public bid limits. This was a no-cost proposal, and the last two, unfortunately, did not advance this session. We are pretty disappointed that our legislators aren't advancing no-cost proposals that actually can benefit school districts. So hopefully they will be back next year. So last slide is the timeline. So session started January 12th. We are cutoffs, various cutoffs are listed there. The next deadline is the opposite house policy committee cutoff February 25th, so on Wednesday. Then there's the opposite house cutoff on March 2nd, and the opposite house cutoff again on March 6th. The House and the Senate did release their kind of supplemental budget proposals today. So then they will negotiate, and again, final budget proposals will be March 12th. So that's where we are.
So a couple comments about the budgets that were released by the House and the Senate over the weekend. And Associate Superintendent Posthumus covered some of those, but I do want to highlight a few of those. Transition to kindergarten, or TK as it's known across the state, was something that was funded, I think, within the last 3 to 4 years. And what do we know about students entering kindergarten prepared to learn? Well, we know that their opportunities and their achievement accelerate. And so I was very hopeful that TK programs would become commonplace across the state. And I distinctly remember a meeting at Puget Sound ESD where Superintendent Reichdahl came and said to superintendents, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, he said, my advice is don't open any new TK programs in second semester because I can't guarantee that those will be funded. And it was almost a precursor to where we are today, where it's a reduction in funding, and even more than that, being very targeted in who will qualify, meaning only students from low-income households, which means many TK programs across the state will just be eliminated because there are not enough students in those communities to qualify for that. And so a verified, research-validated programming that we know impacts students' long-term success is being, essentially eliminated. Maybe not in totality, but it's being reduced to a point where it's going to be very difficult for many districts across the state. Another item I want to talk about that wasn't addressed is the reduction of LEA, so local effort assistance, and that LEA is provided to school districts with, I think it's lower than average assessed valuation of their property, meaning they can't have the same levels of levy collection, local levy collections as peer districts. And LEA is a lifeline for many of our peers across the state. And so just the thought of having that reduced, and I know this board, we've talked extensively about, yes, advocacy for Lake Washington School District students, our community, but it's also broader than that because we serve because we believe every student in the state of Washington deserves an excellent education. And these are two very distinct ways that opportunities for students across the state are being reduced. It may not affect us here specifically, but when the whole is affected, I think we are impacted. And so it was just very disappointing to see kind of the nickel and diming of public education, reduction of running start opportunities, bus depreciation, knowing that if we no longer can apply for depreciation for our zero-emission vehicles that we acquired through grant funding, that essentially eliminates our ability to continue thinking about that. Or it means different decisions have to be made. Things like not applying IPD or the inflationary adjustment to our national board certified teacher bonuses that they receive. Just little things like that just continued to erode rather than really looking at prioritization and being very intentional and strategic. It feels like these are just small ways that public education is further being eroded. I will pause there and pick things up from my superintendent's report.
Thank you, I guess. Thank you for being thorough. I don't, no thank you for some of that content. All right, the first item on the agenda is an enrollment update. Dr. Holman.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and present results 3 progress monitoring from my laptop. And so if enrollment update, thank you. Yes. Okay, I'll go ahead and read our agenda more thoroughly. So one of the things that we know is that annually we receive an enrollment update from Flow Analytics. And as we start to think about moving ahead, this is really a precursor to our conversation at the March extended study session related to kind of the context of the overall boundary process moving forward. And so tonight, Associate Superintendent Posthumus will provide an overview and has unpacked the data a little bit differently to share with the board, because there's some implications here that we need to be thoughtful of as we think about what this data tells us about the future. There was also some key decision points in this report that Barbara will talk about, and really does impact the overall projection. And so with that, I will hold on results 3 and hand it to Associate Superintendent Posthumus to provide an enrollment update.
Thank you very much. All right, and tonight I am really focusing on the long-range forecast, but I just want to start out by kind of answering a basic question. What does the district use enrollment projections for? Because we do prepare multiple types of enrollment forecasts. We engage Flow Analytics, which is an outside planning, GIS, and data analytic consulting firm to review our enrollment trends and demographics. They've been doing our long-range projection for the last 6 years, and we consider long-range a 10-year forecast. So they've been doing it since February 2020 through this February 26. They have also worked with us on our last boundary process within the Lake Washington learning area. So the projection, Flow Analytics provided their projection report to the district on February 17th, and it is included in the board materials tonight. So the district uses the long-range forecast for really our long-range facility planning and our multi-year budget projections and planning. The other forecasts that the district staff, we also prepare what we call short-term projections. These are really our one-year enrollment projections that are based on actual registrations and historical trends. We prepare these projections this month, and then we update them based on registrations at the end of March. The one-year projections are typically conservative, and we want to make sure as we prepare our budget, we're not committing dollars before students are actually enrolled. We use the short-term projections for the next year's budget and staffing allocations. So I just want to remind, as a reminder, the district's current enrollment is 30,155 students. So Flow Analytics prepared this map showing enrollment density. The purple areas on the map are where we have the least amount of students, and you can see the lightest, and I'm going to use the pointer, the laser pointer in a lot of my slides tonight, but you can see most of where the light purple is kind of where our least amount of students, this light purple area. And the yellow areas show where the most students reside. So you can see areas near Muir, Rush Elementary, downtown Redmond, North Redmond, the area just east of Marymore Park, and then the Redmond Ridge area, and the Plateau. All right. So I'm going to share kind of highlights from the forecast. First, I'll do it kind of in narrative form, and then you'll see a graphic following the narrative. So the first highlight I want to talk about are housing developments. Flow gathers residential development data from the district, and they reach out to the planning departments in each of our jurisdictions, King County, and then the cities of Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish, and Woodinville, to assess housing trends within the district. And so based on available information that they gathered this last fall, just over 5,800 housing units are currently under construction, planned or proposed within the 10-year time period. Of those units, about 88% are multifamily apartments and condominiums, 10% are multifamily townhomes, and then 2% are single-family detached units. And that has really changed, as we've shared many times with the board. That has really changed over time. When I started in the district in the 90s, the majority of the development was single-family housing projects and large single-family developments. So although new housing is expected to be built throughout the district, there are areas of concentrated development based on available land, zoning, and conditions. So I want to just talk about each jurisdiction. Kirkland is expected to experience the largest amount of new housing growth, with the potential for approximately 2,600 housing units. The vast majority of these units, 89%, will be multifamily apartments and condominiums. Redmond is also expected to experience a large amount of housing growth, with the potential for 2,400 units. Similar to Kirkland, the vast majority, 89%, will be multifamily apartments and condominiums. The majority of these are located in the city center. Sammamish is expected to experience far less housing growth than Kirkland and Redmond due to the various ordinances that they have that restrict growth. A significant portion of the city is zoned as rural reserve, which also restricts the potential for new residential development. In recent years, the city did ease its moratorium on development that was in place due to traffic, sewer, and water constraints. But despite this, there continues to be concerns related to the infrastructure development and the ability for the city to support new housing projects. So there are about 700 units of growth projected. Again, 90% of this is multifamily in what we call the Sammamish Town Center area. So this map shows where those housing developments are. Flow Analytics is currently tracking over 35 new developments. The blue boxes show multifamily apartments and condos. The larger the box, the larger the development. You can see that most growth is in Totem Lake area, downtown Redmond here, and Sammamish Town Center. There is one development in kind of the Bridle Trail, Bridle Trails area. So the yellow circles, green triangles, which are very hard to see, are the multifamily townhome developments. They are near Muir, right here, near Rose Hill Elementary. There is one right there. That's near, and then there's one up here by Thoreau, a smaller triangle. And then yellow circles are single-family housing developments. There are not a lot of these right now. There's some big ones northeast of Twain, and some and then some in the Juanita Elementary area. All right. The next highlight I want to go over is historical births and kindergarten enrollment. The number of students enrolled in the district is really influenced by the number of school-age children residing in our district. And births play an important factor in estimating future school enrollment. So Flow Analytics does a lot of work on looking at births and historical births and kindergarten enrollment. And so we know, we've been talking about this for multiple years, the number of births has declined within Lake Washington School District each year since 2016. This affects enrollment 5 years later, so really has started to affect us in 2022 and will continue through 2029. The forecast does have births stabilizing with moderate increases, and that will start to impact enrollment in 2030 to 2035. But at this time, there's no anticipation to return to our pre-pandemic levels. So again, we have this detailed chart with a lot of information on it. And again, the report that is attached to the board materials has a much longer narrative, and you can you can look at these charts on your own. So the top row, this is this blue row here, is actual births through 2023. Then this next bottom row with the orange, starting with the orange numbers, are Lake Washington actual kindergarten enrollment through 2025. So the actual births here through 2023, and then this up through fall of 25 is the actual enrollment. And then what Flow does is they do a forecast for that births, and then they do a forecast for the kindergarten enrollment. So what they do, and then they also compare historical birth data, so the live births, to kindergarten class size to determine a kindergarten to birth ratio. And so that's often referred to as the capture rate. And so you can see from this chart that pre-pandemic, this capture rate, so that's this figure right here, the 0.88, 0.92, 0.93, the average rate was around 0.91. So for every 100 children born to district residents, there were 91 children enrolling in kindergarten 5 years later. After the pandemic, so what happened starting in fall of 20, you can see that it decreased to an average of 0.82 or so, okay? And then this fall, all of a sudden it dropped to 0.76. So one of the things, so the middle, and then, so what Flow then is making kind of a decision point that, what ratio are they going to use going forward? And so what they decided to start at 0.79, because again, hard to know, what, is this a one-time anomaly? Is that going to start a new trend? We don't know. And so what they decided is to start with a 0.79. And again, they don't want to be so conservative that it's unrealistic. And so they are using kind of their best guess, and then after the next 4 years, they're kind of stabilizing it at 0.81 starting in 32 and beyond, which is equal kind of to a 5-year average that they've observed. So that, all of this data together is what helps them estimate their kindergarten, what they use to provide our kindergarten forecast. So with these estimates, kindergarten enrollment will fluctuate between 1,737 students, start declining a little bit, and then increasing to 1,795 students at the end of the forecast. All right, So the next highlight from the forecast is grade progression ratios. Another term for this is cohort. You've heard people use the term cohort survival, but this is really how do our students, what's the experience of students moving from one grade to the next grade? That's a significant determinant of future enrollment and so plays an important role in their forecasting process. So they go through a whole assessment of how cohort sizes change over time by calculating what they call grade progression ratios. And so again, if 100 kindergartners were to become 110 first graders, the grade progression ratio would be 1.10. And so a GPR, a value of greater than 1, indicates the student cohort increased in size. And sometimes that's due to students moving into the district, but a GPR value of less than 1.0 indicates the cohort decreased in size. And that may be due to students moving out or students choosing to transfer to another district. So what kind of highlights is our GPR for kindergarten to first grade have trended downward since the pandemic. They're currently 1.06 to 1.08. Pre-pandemic, they were kind of in the range of 1.12 to 15%. And then the assumptions in grades 6 through 10, slightly greater than 1, indicating a net gain. But for historically, the GPRs for grades 10 to 11 and 11 to 12 are lower because our students choose to enroll in Running Start. So now I'll show you the chart related to this. And I know there's a lot of data on here, but so each column is a year, and then this is the GPR for grades K to 1, the GPR for the movement from grades 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and throughout. And so these are up until this line. This is the historical. All these columns represent the historical actual. And then these last 3 columns are what Flow Analytics is using in their projections. And so you can see, as I talked about, kindergarten to first grade was in the 10 to 12%. The high point was almost 12% here. And then what they are using going forward is an 8% GPR. And then what they're using for kind of grades 1 through 9 is very close to 1.0, with the exception of grades 2 through 3, just a little bit higher, 1.012, and 1.2% in grades 1 through 2. And then you can see the impact of Running Start in grades 9 through 10, and 10 to 11, and 11, 12. So we actually lose the GPRs less than 1 because of the enrollment there. All right. So just overall highlights of the 10-year projection, and then again I'll show some charts. But in the forecast that Flow provided us has enrollment declining by 14.8%, or 4,400 students by fall of 2035. This is a decrease or a change from the last year's forecast, meaning that they are projecting a further decline than the prior year, and that's primarily due to the change in births in kindergarten. So they have a range of a low, medium, high, and I'll show that. So that's a range of 9.6% to 19.6% reduction. Just looking short term in the 3-year period, they're projecting a loss of 1,300 students, or about 4.3% from 2026 through 2028. And then by level, the 10-year period, elementary is showing a loss or projecting a loss of 1,502, 11.5%. And I just want to note that elementary has already lost 2,300 students since fall of 2019. So this is on top of that. And middle school, a loss of about 1,600 students, and high school, a loss of 1,300 students. So visually, what this looks like is this chart shows the three district-wide forecast scenarios. The low scenario is the blue line. The middle scenario is the green line, and the red line is the high scenario through the 10-year period. So the decline is anticipated in each forecast year, again, mostly in response to the expectations of fewer births and smaller K cohorts and larger cohorts graduating from the district. And as you can see, the range in the forecast, this is this last column here, is 24,254 to 27,274. So this is another chart showing the middle scenario forecast by individual grade. Again, there's a lot of numbers on here, so I'll kind of walk through. This darker shaded green numbers really represent the highest enrollment numbers, 2,400 to 2,500 per grade, where the whiter shading, the lighter shading is lower enrolled cohorts, such as 1,600 to 1,700. So, for example, our kindergarten. You can see how lower kindergarten numbers kind of move through the system. And ultimately create lower enrollment throughout the district. So our going back to kind of this year, our bubble, so to speak, of about 2,400, that's going to move through the district, and eventually those students will graduate, and causing an overall decline in the district. And we know, so we're graduating, again, our large senior classes are graduating of 2,200, 2,100, but we're replacing those senior classes with 1,700 to 1,800 students. And so that is an overall decline. And we've talked about, even though there is new housing developments, it's not likely to offset the overall enrollment decline. And although some grade progression ratios are greater than 1, because the incoming kindergarten classes, again, that incremental growth isn't enough to offset the replacement of the comparatively larger secondary cohorts. So let me see if I have any other notes on this. So again, the overall forecast for each elementary, grades K through 5, is this row. The forecast for grades 6 through 8, middle school, is this row. So again, 11% in elementary, 22% in middle school. The forecast for high school is this row, decline of 14.5%. Bringing an overall decrease of 14.8%, or 4,451 students. All right, a couple more charts just showing our enrollment. This is another visual, a line chart to show the data. Again, the access range doesn't start from 0, it starts from 25,000 students, so exaggerating the decline each year. And we are here in this first column of, that's our 30,155. All right, one more chart. Well, I have more charts, but this is, related to the enrollment forecast. I have more tables. So this is another visual providing history of Lake Washington enrollment and future projections. For those that have been in the district, in our community for a while, they may remember that Lake Washington experienced exponential growth beginning in 2008. So here's where we were in 2008, about 23,500 students, and 23,769 to be exact. So we grew 31% through fall of 2019. And in fact, in the last year, between fall of 2018 and fall of 19, that was 1,000 student growth in just 1 year. So we know our community has passed multiple construction measures so we could build new schools, enlarge existing schools, and add additions to others to create capacity. We have a total of 162 portables in our district due to that exponential growth. Since the pandemic, which occurred here, that rapid growth halted and enrollment has decreased slightly, with the largest drop off this fall. So this was fall of 24 and fall of 25. So we've decreased in that time period about 945 students, or 3.1%. The new projections from Flow Analytics has the decline continuing by another 14.8%. So that's from this time period to here. So that's, and this represents 25,704 students here. So as I've shared throughout the presentation, this is a result of two primary factors: decrease in bursts and within Lake Washington School District, combined with a lower percentage of those students enrolling in Lake Washington School District, and which results in fewer kindergarten students. New housing units that are being built are majority multifamily, which generates less students. Back in the 90s, 100 single-family unit generated 61 students, where 100 multifamily unit generates 9 students. So there's a big difference when you're moving from single-family to multifamily. All right. So overall, we always get the question, well, how accurate are these forecasts? And so our long-term projections have been within 1 to 2% of actual enrollment. A 1% margin represents about 300 students district-wide, or about 5 students at each elementary school, or 22 at a high school. A 1 to 2% margin is very reasonable for a district of our size. Flow Analytics' goal is to be within 1% district-wide, but also, as we know, the longer you go out, it is harder to be accurate, especially school by school. So, so their projection from last year compared to our October numbers was a 1.1% difference. So, all right, I want to just talk a little bit about impact to individual schools, and I'm going to bring in some columns. So at our elementary level, I want to walk through back in our peak enrollment when we were at 31,000 students. The number of elementary schools, we had 29 elementary schools, and we had 9 of those elementary schools had enrollment above 600 students. 6 of those elementary schools had enrollment below 400 students, and of those 0 had enrollment below 300. Our largest elementary school at the time was 724 students. Our smallest was 313. This year, we have 2 out of 29 elementary schools above 600. We have 10 schools below 400 students, and we have 3 schools below 300 students. Our largest school is 626 students. Our smallest school is 238. In 3 years, we will have 1 elementary school above 600 students based on the projections. We will have 15 elementary schools below 400 students and 4 below 300 students, with the largest being 623 and the smallest being 210. By the 10th year of the projections, no schools will be above 600, 16 will be below 400, 4 below 300, with the largest school at 598 and the smallest school at 199. So I'm going to do the same for our secondary schools. Our middle school, our peak enrollment at 2019-20, we had 3 out of 8 schools above 900 students. We had 4 out of 8 schools below 700 and 0 schools below 500. Our largest middle school was 1,289, the smallest 604. Of our high schools, we had 1 high school above 2,000, 2 high schools below 1,800. The largest high school was 2,228, the smallest was 1,444. This year, we have 2 out of 8 middle schools above 900, 2 out of 8 below 700, and 0 below 500. The largest is 1198, the smallest 640. Our high schools, as you know, have been growing because the bubble is hitting our high schools. So 2 out of 4 are above 2,000. 1 out of 4 is below 1,800. So our largest high school is 2,334, and our smallest is 1,669. In 3 years, 3 out of 8 of our middle schools will be above 900. 2 out of 8 will be below 700, 0 out of 8 will be below 500. So the largest will be 1103, the smallest 623. High schools, 3 out of 4 will be above 2,000, 1 out of 4 will be below 1,800. So the largest will be 2,300 and the smallest will be 1,717. And then by the 10th year, as the bubble starts moving away from middle school and away, out of high school, 0 middle schools will be above 900, 5 will be below 700, and 1 will be below 500. So we will have the largest middle school as 783, the smallest 403. And then we will have 0 high schools above 2,000. 3 out of 4 will be below 1,800, with the largest at 1,864 and the smallest at 1,636. All right, that was a lot of numbers. But again, I thought it was important to share that context of how kind of the size of our schools could change over time. So key takeaways from the long-range forecast: enrollment is declining by 14.8%. This will require continued staffing and budget adjustments commensurate with enrollment. Again, that's really important to maintain a healthy fund balance and stability for the district. The majority of new developments are multifamily, which continue to generate low number of students. Births have declined and are stabilizing, but not returning to 2016 levels. So what does the future look like with 4,500 less students? 4,500 less students is the equivalent of 7 large elementary schools. It equates to $51.8 million in revenue. We will be continuing to adjust based on staffing ratios, and it means less classroom teachers. It means less classified staff and less administrative staff. So it means we may not be able to do things in the future that we are currently doing. So next steps is continued discussion related to the scope of the boundary work. We presented it at the December study session, and then we'll provide an update in the March 13th, 2026 study session. And we will share a communication and engagement plan at that time. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Director Meekhoff.
Thank you very much for all of that data. This is new to me, and it was really fascinating but difficult to get through. I think I had a question in terms of the multifamily projects, historically generating a low number of students. Mm-hmm. Has it been taken into account at all? We're seeing a real shift of our communities evolving and changing and becoming more urban. Is there a possibility, are we seeing that more families will be living in those communities?
Yeah, so as part of our new King County, I'll answer your question kind of indirectly, but as part of our new King County impact fee ordinance, it does require tracking of middle housing, which is townhome duplexes and multiplexes, and that's also, state laws have required that all jurisdictions build more of that middle housing. And it requires that we calculate our impact fees by bedroom counts. The cities haven't typically tracked bedroom counts when it comes to developments. And so they're thinking about how to get that information through an affidavit process. But ultimately, over time, depending on, as multifamily housing becomes more commonplace, you would expect to see the student generation rates increase. The other thing, as developments get older, we know that sometimes our older housing developments attract more families than our newer developments. So sometimes it's the price point as well. So those are all things. We have not seen a significant change in the student generation rate in our multifamily yet, but, who's to say in 10 years we won't see that turn around?
And I think it's a good question, and it's a question that the board has been asking, I think, for 15 years. Yeah. I mean, honestly, because it's as this growth started, we all were kind of asking that question, and all were anticipating our multifamily student generation rate to change probably before now, and it really hasn't changed much. And so what we do know is for a few of the multifamily complexes that we have verified data related to number of bedroom units or bedrooms per unit, that we do have a slightly higher student generation rate at those locations. But for the typical, I'll say run-of-the-mill, I don't know if that's the right term but a one-bedroom, a studio, like I know downtown Redmond has built a lot of those types of housing units.
What they call luxury apartments, even though everything that's new is called luxury as a selling point. So
there you go. And so we just haven't seen it change yet. And I guess maybe that's a question for Flo is, do they have a school district that at some point has seen a shift in student generation rate in multifamily units? And I think we've asked that question, and I think they've answered it.
I think they have answered it, and I don't have it at the top of my head, but they haven't seen similar. So I'll go back and get those notes, because I did ask that question with Flo, and because they do work with a lot of districts, especially in the greater Portland area, and so.
Do we know when our cities will start to have actionable data related to bedroom count for the middle? Did you call it middle housing?
Yes, and they are required to start gathering that. Really, it will go in the impact. Our capital facility plan that we do this spring in May goes into effect in January of 27. So the cities will have to implement the new impact fee proposals January of 27, and so that's when they will start collecting the data so that they can implement the fees appropriately. So it's going to take some time to get some trends, and in bedroom count, I've seen, it's buried in kind of the project. In certain cities, you can go see the project viewer, and it's buried in all their plans and documents on some developments. And so, and every jurisdiction is different. In Kirkland, 10% of all multifamily development has to be affordable housing, where in Redmond, many of the affordable housing projects are standalone. Those tend to also create a higher bedroom count. So, but it really is project by project specific. But it is going to be up to our jurisdictions to get that information.
Director Richter.
Just to say a few things so that we're all on the same page. I apologize to Barbara because she's heard me talk about this before. But agree with everything you just said about our different properties throughout the cities. There are a lot of Studio One fewer two-bedroom, very few three-bedroom being created. There are a few properties like the Together Center in Redmond. There's another one up by Totem Lake, who I can't remember the name of,
Polaris,
that are entirely affordable housing communities, buildings, whatever you want to call them. And I know the last time I went to the Together Center and asked, over 50% of their residents are under the age of 18. So it's like this really bright spot on the heat map of where students come from. But then other buildings, as you pointed out, are studios, and those don't tend to generate many students. The middle housing is things like down the street from me, there was one house that gets knocked down and then 4 houses, it gets subdivided, and so that's more infill. And there was a previous version of this map they made where there were little dots all over Kirkland, essentially, like little four house developments. It kind of showed how it was spread all over the place. I don't see that so much on this map this time. But, right, the other thing is just that these new luxury things are $4,000 or so, and families aren't necessarily moving into them. I can look at this map and I know where the older garden style apartments are that rent for significantly less than that, and there's a lot of kids there. So there is like this aging out process that happens. Like you said, I'm not saying anything new to you, Barbara. I'm just saying it for the air, so we all know that I think about these things. I am very curious to see what happens going forward. Definitely, I looked at the project list, and like in Redmond, again for everyone, the list that's in the file is what's in their planning department's been permitted. It's to a certain point in the work, but there are other projects that are being, proposed, going to planning commission. They're in the works, so it doesn't capture the full scope of what might happen, I guess I would say. Sorry, I said a lot. I'll stop there for now.
Sarah?
This is just a question for the slide before this one, but I was just wondering what kind of activities would we lose with the decrease in funding due to having less students?
So there's no specific list right now, but it's just, as you know, the district over the last 3 years have had to make budget reductions to kind of get our budget, our revenues, our expenditures in alignment with revenues. And so we've had to make some decisions. And so as we do every year, we will continue to analyze kind of what is needed on an annual basis and make recommendations. And so, but we don't have a specific list at this time.
Director Yocum?
Am I totally remembering this incorrectly, but last year did Flo come back with information? I feel like I recall seeing them present information on, did they have Seattle School District, and they had, you're shaking your head. Do you remember this? Or are you
I don't know if I remember specifically what you're saying.
Generation rates. I feel we had asked, and then they came back, and I've been looking all over for it, and I can't find it. So I feel like they did come back with that. Okay, and they were much higher based on bedrooms. I feel like it was wasn't it 0.8?
It was higher. I don't know much higher.
I don't know numbers, but I feel like I remember it was much higher than just the multifamily number that we were given. But I think they had more data. And so why is it is it just that other cities track that? Or do they track bedrooms? Because it sounded like you said our cities don't track number of bedrooms. And I'm just curious, does that mean, do other cities do that?
I don't recall Flo bringing any data relating to bedroom count, but they do calculate in their plan student generation rates relating to kind of townhomes versus apartment condos versus single family. I will follow up to see if what you're saying is something they did and I'm just not remembering, but
or it was a dream, because I was so hopeful they came back with it.
Director Richter?
I have an actual question this time. predicated on the fact that over the last 5 or 6 years, the flow projection has sometimes matched and sometimes not matched reality. Are we traditionally looking at these reports and trying to plan like 1 year out, 3 years out? What's kind of our time frame on what we should be thinking about?
So 1 year out is the most accurate. And so back to maybe the second slide, what do we do? It's like long range, short range. And so definitely short range planning, we use this. The pandemic, right or wrong, interrupted our patterns. And so I still feel like we're waiting for the pattern to settle in as to what the new normal is. I think Flow is in the same place. They talk to us about what we see in terms of the patterns as they're developing their kind of final report for us. There's opportunity to be more optimistic and less optimistic. So if we just take it's the birth to kindergarten ratio. The most optimistic view of that would be, well, let's just take the last 4 or 5 years and do an average, and that would slightly tick up the number of students that we are planning for. Where they landed was 0.79 over the next few years. That's almost for us like a low water mark for a pretty extended period of time, but it feels like that's the right perspective to take at this point in time, because we just, I believe, hit our lowest watermark of 0.76. And so, I have my beliefs as to what will happen. I made my kindergarten projection already this year, and so I made it today. And so, but the data, just what it's telling us, if the last 3 years can be the pattern, then moving forward, we need to expect less students are coming to our schools than are, having been born 5 years prior. And that actually doesn't mean people are choosing not to send their kids to Lake Washington School District schools. There's a whole bunch of factors for why a student is born in a location and doesn't go to school in that location. And that could be, we know that over the last 5 years, we have a very international workforce here in our school district. And so we know families have returned to their country of origin. We know visa challenges cropped up dramatically during COVID. And since that, so there's so many factors that go into why that number is what it is today. And so having a less optimistic view, which is what I read the Flow report as, I think is the right place to be today, so that we're not overwhelmed in the future by kind of a worse decline than we would have planned for otherwise. So that's my very long answer to, I don't even know if I answered your question.
So I'm hearing, let's go with this for this year, because that is the most prudent and it's a wise decision for us to make. But we're not committed to past that. We're going to keep monitoring and see where we go.
I think the last 5 years are informational. The fact that we had our largest decline this year, we had our smallest kindergarten class size this year, those are all things that are starting to shape the belief that the projection, even if you take the high projection, we need to consider what to do about that. I'm not, I'm hard pressed to believe the low projection, and we use the middle projection because it just feels like that's a conservative view as to where we're going to go, and planning in that mindset allows us then to respond if there's more students that are attending.
And Aspen, as I shared at the beginning of the presentation, we really do, the long-range forecast is really our look beyond a year. And we, for budgeting and staffing for next fall, we will do what we call our one-year projections, school by school. We look at actual registrations and refine. Flow analytics, definitely that one-year number informs that, but we will continue to refine that in the next months ahead for just next year. But we really do use Flow's projections for kind of the longer range, knowing that, yeah, the second 5 years is not going to be perfect.
Can I say one more thing? There's also checkpoints in the short term. Mm-hmm. And so our budget team will land on a number for kindergarten for next year in the budget. And then as we go through the spring and we see actual students enrolling, then we project out, well, based on this actual enrollment, this is what we project will be here, September of the school year. And that projection is even more exact than what Flow has today. And so registration for secondary schools. So those are all checkpoints that help us evaluate the one-year projection, even though that's a relatively stable number. We refine it, and for all of those activities that we do, staffing, student enrollment, and things like that, we refine it as we go with those benchmarks as well.
So I just encourage all parents who are listening, if you have kindergartners, to register, get them in as our registration opens up. We will look at our first round of kindergarten numbers at the beginning of March, and that will get us, ready for the fall as we project our kindergarten enrollment. So,
and I have to say, our communications team just put together a video that was put on social media that will also do some additional boosting with, not just saying enroll in Lake Washington or enrollment's open, but actually saying this is a great place for your child to come to kindergarten. We had some of our kindergarten teachers talking about kindergarten, and they did a tremendous job. And so being proud of what we actually offer, I think, is really important, because families have choices that they get to make. I think this is a great choice for families, and so we're proud to say that. We also as you know, went through a process to identify a couple of our feeder patterns where if families choice transfer into that feeder pattern, we'll guarantee contiguous enrollment through high school. We know that's a big barrier to choice transfers from outside of the district, inside of the district. And so we can't do that everywhere, but there's some very specific places that we can. And so just trying to think of different ways to not only talk about what we provide and what we offer, but also just given we do have some available capacity, make that a choice that's, possible for families, because choosing just to go to elementary school for 1 year, which is current choice transfer kind of protocols, there's not a lot of families that are willing to kind of gamble that. And so those kinds of things as well could affect, maybe not move the needle back to growth, but could help stabilization.
Director LaLiberty.
Okay, a few things. One, I could not find, it was in board briefs. I haven't been able to find it yet, but I did find the student generation rates for Seattle Public Schools. And it is, believe it or not, for multifamily below for Lake Washington School District. So we have about 0.08 K through 12 students generated by a multifamily unit. In Seattle, it is I just closed it. It is lower. 0.03. I don't know how these numbers are expressed, actually, now that I'm looking at this. At any rate, it's available on their website for those who want to look. That would probably be better. I think I see 0.03. Okay, please follow up with accurate numbers that are not me. The other thing, this is an opinion and not a fact, so I feel more comfortable expressing it. I think that the board, Director Richter was asking Dr. Holman, like, how should we look at the long range forecast, and how should we think? He was asking of staff. I think as a board, like, it's our job too to like wrestle with that and think about it, and like when we make decisions, like I do think we need to be forecasting something, right? And like this is one methodology of forecasting. We could have our own, internal forecast of, I walked down the street, I saw 3 houses being built, so I think it's going to grow, or we can rely upon something else, or a blend of those things. And so, yes, I 100% agree that the shorter range, the more likelihood of accuracy, but I do place some weight in the long-term forecast here. And when I think about decisions we make as a board, that is an odd data point, some data to think about and look at. I do think there's value. I think that I guess I have a question. I was going back and looking at our prior, this is a question I should have asked in advance of the meeting, so it's going to be a pop quiz, I'm really sorry. I was looking back at the prior flow reports for years past and thinking about, because we've always had that, well, we're looking at the middle, we don't really think it's going to be the low, maybe it'll be the high. And I was looking at it, mapping it out. It's been closer, I think it's fair to say, it's been closer to the low than to the high, at least, right? We've been at middle, or for example, this year for kindergarten we were below low, and maybe and I'm recency biased a little bit on that, but they have been at middle or middle-ish or low-ish. I don't think at high-ish, at least for the last 5 years in terms of the forecast. And when we look at like the long-term forecast, that has been revised down every year. So that's something to think about too. I think some of the things we were wondering about birth rates, whether that was going to be just a blip or a longer-term trend, I do think that is something that is borne out in the data now, as that is at least for my generation, a longer-term trend of lower birth rates. So, okay, and then the last thing, I told Director Yoakum this already. I convinced one family in my district to switch from my neighborhood to switch from private school to first grade next year. So we can add one more to that.
That's great. Thank you.
And actually, I didn't. I've now lied on my wife convinced them. I had nothing to do with it. That's why I didn't respond to your question about how I did it, because I did not. So.
I just want to make sure what we're saying is accurate. I believe in the last 5 years, it's and I don't have the data right in front of me, but 2 or 3 of the years we grew when flow projected us to reduce.
Okay. Yes, I agreed with that. Yes, I thank you for surfacing that. I have been focused on the kindergarten enrollment.
Okay. Fair.
In fact, like for example, some of the years where we grew instead of reduced is because the grade progression ratios at the high school level were higher than forecasted. This year that wasn't really the case, but that was in the prior years where it came in higher. The kindergarten, both the forecasts for birth rates and for kindergarten enrollment have come in below. And for me, like the longer term, when we're thinking about can we rely on these, speaking for myself, when I think about can we rely on these in the longer term, like those are the data points that are of more interest.
Director Richter.
Just wanted to bounce back to Director LaLiberty and Superintendent Holtman. Agree with you on the birth rates. The long-term trend in a society like ours is clear. They go down over time, et cetera. For me, it's always been the immigration into our area and the wild card about that. Events outside of our control in the past year have undoubtedly affected that. So while I'm an optimist, and you all know that I come in here and try to find ways that it would go up, this year I looked at it and went, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand why these numbers would be here. I also found it fascinating, just as a data point, scrolling through the individual schools. I went back to last year's and looked, and they were all below. And usually it's like one has some growth that we don't expect, there's new housing near it, but they were all down just a little bit. And so that was just my observation, bouncing back to something actually actionable. Agreeing with Director LaLiberty, yeah, it behooves us to make the contingency plans, look at the different trends, and maybe find a plan in the middle where we're well positioned to shift as needed, if it grows, if it doesn't grow. So that's just my thought.
Director Meekhoff.
This has me thinking too just about our discussions around proactive enrollment and, rather than just watching the numbers, that we do have the ability to impact those numbers and thinking about how or, what we want to do with that. I think what Dr. Holman said in terms of the choice pathway, but really looking at what private schools are doing. What are they doing with kindergarten entry? How could we be envisioning this differently rather than doing what we've always done? And yeah, being able to impact those numbers.
I'm 75% confident I had the student generation rate for Seattle correct.
Yeah, I was looking at to Director Meekhoff's point about being proactive and looking just at out-of-district enrollment, just a number to throw out. So we have 361 students currently out-of-district enrolled in Lake Washington. Bellevue this year has over 1,400, just as sort of a data point of what that number could be, or not could be, but I'll just throw out that data point without judgment. How's that? One other thing about kindergarten enrollment, I know last year in board briefs, y'all were great about each week sort of updating us. I think especially it was tracking kindergarten enrollment, and there's a couple key checkpoints for other grades throughout. I think that would be helpful data for the board to have if it's not too much trouble throughout this spring as well. I think that gave as we were in budget conversations throughout the spring and talking about some different things, it was helpful to have that real-time data of where we were tracking and made that low kindergarten number, at least for me, less of a surprise when it came in the fall. It was like, oh yeah, based on what we were seeing throughout the spring, that makes sense. It wasn't maybe so much of a shock. So that's a request. Director Richter.
Sorry. I have a question that's a little bit multi-factor. What we were just saying about encouraging enrollment growth, what we were talking about in the study section actually had me thinking about pre-K education, our pre-K program, and then you had that legislative update about transition to kindergarten. I guess my actual question was, I went on the district website earlier, and for parents watching, there was the lovely notice to enroll in the pre-K lottery, if you want to try to get in. Is pre-K a net positive, negative, budgetarily wise, or wash for us? And if you don't know, get back to me.
So Associate Superintendent Posthumus would have to give you the exact numbers. I know from our levy presentation, about 30% of our preschool programming costs come from our local levy. We have multiple ways students arrive in preschool. So we have students that qualify through our child find process, and so they're qualified for special education services. We have students that qualify for services based on family income levels. And then we have families that choose to pay to send their student to our preschools. And so overall, we're still funding part of the overall preschool, but the pay to participate part of it, I think, is a net neutral.
I mean, again, I just have the overall number of the levy support, so it's about $600,000 to $800,000 of the overall budget. And just as an aside, we are Kim Brenner, who oversees our director of early learning program. We are slightly down. I don't have exact numbers, but she is seeing lower enrollment in our preschool programs as well.
For whatever it's worth, I've had a couple parents comment about the length of the preschool day and its attractiveness to parents, how it would be more attractive if it was longer, and just throw that into the mix as well in terms of attracting parents to our district. But I mean, there is that need that people have for childcare right now, so a thought.
Do we know what the capture rate is for students who attend preschool moving on to kindergarten in our district? You don't need to know that off the top of your head, but that would be interesting to know. Because I know we've also seen that, actually I think it was on consent tonight, there's an increase in preschool fees, yes. And I can assume that offsets, when we increase preschool fees, that makes things easier on us from a budgeting perspective. But I could also imagine that makes preschool less attractive too. And so thinking about just all of that together, if preschool is an effective pathway into our system, there's a value, there's actually a monetary value in that, yes. And thinking about how we, from a budgeting perspective, balance all of those pieces would be interesting to think through. Not kind of spouting right now, but just some of the things that I've been thinking about with some of the stuff that's been coming across. Any other questions? More spouting? I had it as 0.3. I had it from Director Liberty and I. Okay, maybe that's it. The single family. Okay, yeah. That I had that in notes from when. Your judgment over mine is the problem. It's in my notes from when we.
0.3 for single family does make sense.
Yeah, that would make sense.
0.03 is high for multifamily.
Yes, for Seattle. And I had Issaquah's 0.15, if that helps with like localizing where this was. It's in my notes from when Director Liberty and I met with Flo last year separately to ask some detailed questions about these projections. So it's in my notes from that meeting, but sometimes I also bring in notes from other meetings, so it could have been another time, but yeah. Sarah.
Okay, I don't think I framed my last question right, but what I was trying to get at was, would the potential loss of revenue not be proportional to the decrease in funds needed to maintain a smaller amount of students? So if so, why couldn't we just have why couldn't we have the same activities just to a smaller, less students?
It's a great question. One of the challenges, have you heard of the term economy of scale? It's the idea that the larger you get, you can economize activities. And so, meaning as a large school district, we have staff and programs that a small school district could never afford because our budget is so large. And so we're able to do, you can find the dollars to do an activity. I'll give you an example. We have a government relations liaison in Lake Washington School District. It was actually a board request from 2018, 2019 school year. And so that staff member costs X amount of dollars. Well, if you're a school district of 500 students, you just can't, there's no room in your budget, but because of this. And so the other piece is, as you're reducing, you have activities and programs in place because of, you're able to do that because you're a larger school district. And it isn't that as you reduce, it perfectly just a staff member reduces and so you actually have to then end up making decisions. And so when I look at that $51 million in revenue lost, and then you take 4,500 students and divide it by the average class size and you get a number of teachers, it's actually underwhelming, meaning I thought the total cost, I'll say savings in that, would be a lot more than it actually is, but it's way less than I thought it would be. And so it's like you have to contract the whole system, and you can't do that evenly across all programs, all schools, all staffing levels. And so, like, that's a very unarticulate way of saying it. There's complexity in it that you actually have to evaluate as you go, and make different decisions. And I'll give you another example. Central office. I don't have the exact number, but in terms of central administrators, when we were a school district of 23,000, we had probably 60% less in central administrators than we do today. And some might say, well, just cut administrators. Well, but the requirements have increased so dramatically. So if we just take the requirement of public records requests, in 2008, I'm sure there was a Public Records Act. I'm sure people had the opportunity to request records. It's a completely different thing today. We have multiple staff members whose full-time job is to respond and address public records requests. That will be true at 31,000. That would be true at 25,000. And so that activity that, as we reduce, we should be able to proportionally, we have to increase it. So there's just a lot to that question you asked. And then you have to do it based on priorities. And so if we center our students, and what do our students need, how do we support them the best, some of that is through direct student programs, but it also is ensuring that your teachers get paid, ensuring that they have health benefits. Like, all of those things are important as well. And so it's an extensive process to go through evaluating how do you reduce. So it's a great question, though.
Okay, that's good. But I'm also curious about one more thing. This is a little bit separate, but does the government give some amount of money for each student? Is that how it works? So when they cut by 4,500 students, then we can just calculate, like, that's how much money it got cut? Or would they give us would they fund less activities because there's less students or something? Or is it just like a specific number per each student?
So the first answer is yes. We receive it's called a per pupil allocation. And so the state funds us based on the number of students we have. And then the state funds us based on participation in specific programs, special education, learning assistance program. So there's a number of different programs that they also fund. And so some students generate additional funding beyond just that initial. But that $51.8 million is essentially the calculation of number of students times that number.
Okay, that's good. And I have one more that's a little bit also to the side. But if we get funding for one activity, like you said, we get funding for students in like a specific activity for special education or other activities, then is the district allowed to allocate those funds somewhere else, or do we have to invest in that activity?
Yeah. So the basic allocation, the per pupil, that's a great question. It's an allocation model, and so generally we can use those dollars how we want. Now, you have to have a teacher, you have to have a principal. You're kind of forced into some of those decisions, but ultimately it's called an allocation model, meaning they give us the money and then we spend those funds. In special education, we're required by law to spend those funds on our program of special education. Now, they don't fund it fully, and so we have to spend $22+ million of our local levy dollars to fund that program, and that's true of most of our programs. The state doesn't even come close to funding enough for us to actually be able to run those programs. Multilingual programs, special education programs, highly capable programs. So we're shorted across the board. So I'll talk about that in my superintendent's report as well.
Director Yoakum.
Okay, I'm going to email this to everybody, but I did find the memo from Flo on April 4th, 2025, where it does say, this is the Seattle Public Schools. Is this the one you were mentioning? No. Oh, is that the one that you're on? Okay, so just Seattle Public Schools, single-family detached is 0.320 student generation rate. Multifamily affordable 2+ bedroom is 0.785. So.
Does that have the
It's
all?
100, what was that?
Does that have the all in there? And is it 0.03? All multifamily?
Okay, so there's single-family, townhome, multifamily market rate, and
Yeah.
multifamily affordable 2-bedroom.
Okay.
So I think
Seattle-
that was in response to our, like, asking about, do you have student generation rates for bedroom and affordable housing? So I guess I was looking at the flow report, hoping that we would see something like that, but then I don't think, I don't know if that's not tracked here. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so what will it take to track that, I guess?
I believe that's what our cities are required to do moving forward
Got it.
related to impact fees.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Associate Superintendent Posthumus, for this update and for all the information and work that goes into it. Should we do a 10-minute recess before we get into R3? Would that be okay? Yeah? We'll recess until 9:10. Tonight we will be progress monitoring results 3, life and global citizenship skills. Dr. Holman.
So this is the first progress monitoring for results 3, and the last 2 reports you heard from my team, and as we were developing this report, Associate Superintendent Ortega and I were having a conversation. I started developing this, and ultimately I said, you know what, I've gone so far into this, why don't I just continue this? And so, but Pablo will come up a little bit later to talk about some strategies related to self-efficacy. And so tonight's report really is focused on self-efficacy, and we've done some work related to R3, so I'm going to dabble into that and just a number of factors. There's also, we have a data view in Panorama that I brought some data to share with you, as well as some question-by-question view. And it's not really an analysis, it's more of just a view. We don't have any comparators in the question-by-question outcomes from our students. And we know that at our extended study session, the board will be engaging with myself and my team related to how we are reporting favorability. Right now we report favorable and neutral. And you'll see in the question-by-question portion, what does it actually mean to answer in what Panorama considers a neutral manner? And so I started off with what is self-efficacy. I am not going to proclaim to be an expert, and so I dug into this. What I know is that the name Bandura is a historical psychologist who has studied this for many, many years, and self-efficacy theory is defined as the belief that one is capable of executing the behaviors necessary to achieve a specific outcome. And I think the key word in there is the belief. And so self-efficacy really does ground itself in one's belief in their ability to accomplish or succeed. And so just in that, you can see how kind of complex and deep it is to try and ask our students to report out their own belief in themselves. This is Panorama's specific definition or comment. Why does self-efficacy matter? Again, you can see in here, self-efficacy, otherwise known as confidence, is the belief that you have the ability to achieve a goal or an outcome. And so, and then even more succinctly, their theory of action, students with high levels of confidence are more likely to achieve academic goals and outcomes. And so that's kind of from the theoretical to the Panorama definition to the theory of action. And what we've seen in Lake Washington, it actually causes some concern, and why we have spent so much time talking about self-efficacy. What is it about our students that they're kind of reporting lower levels of self-efficacy? And so as we get into the data, there's some interesting elements there. I'm going to briefly run through the indicators and targets for results 3. I'm also going to touch on the updated indicators and the actions to date related to those indicators. And so indicator 3.1 focuses on emotional regulation. The indicator is % of students reporting positively as to how well they perceive their ability to regulate their emotions on the Panorama Emotion Regulation Survey. And so we know that emotional regulation is part of a pro-social behaviors. 3.2 is self-management, % of students reporting positively as to how well they regulate their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. 3.3, self-efficacy. There's There previously was one indicator, which is the percent of students reporting positively as to how well they believe they can succeed in achieving academic outcomes, and that is the overall reporting of self-efficacy. There's forgive me, 5 or 6 questions that are, it's a bank of questions that in their total are reporting out an overall self-efficacy score. The board updated 2 indicators. First is percent of staff positively reporting that students believe they have the skills and ability to be successful. And then a different type of data that we'll be bringing to the board the next time we monitor is themes from student interviews and focus groups that reflect opportunities for student agency, self-determination, and resilience. And so what are we doing about these things? So the indicator that staff positively reporting that students believe they have the skills and ability to be successful. I just want to pause there for a second. It's a very interesting thing that we are asking for because not only when we're evaluating self-efficacy, we're asking an individual to report about their own belief. Now we are asking an adult to report about what they believe a student's belief is about themselves. And so as these data come back, we're just going to have to be thoughtful about like what does that mean? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of survey protocols because that's another important factor because we don't have the resource, I'll say, to test questions the way research groups such as Panorama does. And so what's the action? We're adding a new Panorama staff question. And I say we because we are the ones writing it. And the question reads, rate your agreement with this. The students that I interact with believe they have the skills and ability to be successful. And so that's the question that will be put forward to staff today, or excuse me, this year in our staff survey to try and again get at another vantage point related to self-efficacy of our students. Next indicator, themes from student interviews and focus groups. We're developing those for this spring. And then, okay, so that's self-efficacy. 3.4 is related to social awareness, percent of students reporting positively as to how well they consider the perspective of others and empathize with them based on Panorama social awareness survey. 3.5, cultural awareness and action. Previously had a single indicator. We now have 4 indicators here. That first indicator is the one that has been in place for a number of years. Percent of students reporting positively as to their preparedness for discussing and confronting issues of race, ethnicity, and culture in school. And kind of the theory behind that being evaluative of cultural awareness and action is almost like a proxy that if they're reporting that in this way, that it then leads to essentially an assessment of cultural awareness and action. The board said we think it needs to be a little bit broader than that. And so brought in 3 new indicators for 3.5. And the request was, take these indicators and see does Panorama have any survey items related to these. Ultimately, the answer is no. Panorama does not. Like they offered a couple, but they just weren't even in the, they just didn't hit the mark. I'll say we had very specific language that we were focused on as we developed these indicators. And so I'll just go to the actions and read these, the updated indicators. So the first updated indicator, percent of students positively reporting the ability to participate in learning with peers of various abilities. So that's the indicator that, and if you remember, this was a conversation over multiple meetings to really land on these specific indicators. And so what are we doing? Adding a new Panorama student question that will be on the spring 2026 student survey. And the question is, I am able to learn and work with classmates who have different abilities than I do. So attempting to frame the indicator in a student-friendly manner. Hopefully making it readable, hopefully being specific about what we're looking for. The next indicator, percent of students positively reporting they have an understanding of differences based on ability and disability. Again, this was language that we were very specific about, and so the Panorama question that we've put forward, or that will be on the spring survey, I understand that people have different abilities and disabilities, and that these differences are a positive and normal part of who they are. And so, again, just trying to use language that is descriptive, language that describes what we're asking them to respond to. And then the last indicator, percent of students positively reporting they are prepared to discuss and confront issues related to disability status. And so, again, adding a Panorama question, I feel prepared to talk about disability and stand up for others when someone is treated unfairly because of their abilities. So those are the questions that are getting put forward to Panorama. Any questions or comments?
Director Yoakum.
Thank you. I just have a question about the last two questions. I almost view those as two separate questions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and is that sort of, are we trying to gauge students that can achieve, like, we're trying to see both of them, those that fill the gaps of, like, or not fill the gaps, that I understand and that they have a positive. So I'm trying to think, if I were a student and filling that out, right, would I say, yes, I understand, but maybe I don't view it as positive, right? Or I feel prepared to talk about it, but not to stand up for others. Like, there's almost like a one comes and then the next one comes, like it's a deeper level. So I'm just curious how the thinking went with designing those, with sort of a kind of like an entry level understanding and then to something deeper.
Yeah. So part of the challenge we have is maintaining a survey that is going to be completed. Like, just to be completely honest. And so if we were to break each of these indicators into multiple questions, so that's kind of the decision point, was to try and take the indicator language and to assess it with a survey item, because the indicator I'm prepared to discuss and confront. Like, both are there, and so I'm going to talk about how I'm proposing that we evaluate these, since we're not going to have Chromebox Alpha to give us data around, validity and reliability, but I think there's some things we can do to continue testing these as we use them, to even asking students to respond, to tell us, when you answered this question, what were you answering? What did you, and so getting some data that way as well.
Director Richter?
I have to admit, I wrote down, while we were going over this same one that Director Yoakum just came up with, that it felt like a leading question. Because what student is going to read that these differences are a positive and normal part of who they are, and go like, no, I don't believe that. I don't know, maybe some high school students would, but it felt like a question phrased so positively that people would be afraid to answer it however they feel.
Yeah.
So I will chime in and say that I feel where Director Yoakum's coming from on that one.
I think in drafting them,
Mm-hmm.
in a slide at some point, I talk about equity concerns of writing your own survey items and the idea of do no harm. Because anytime you put a survey out with language, so I lean toward the side of I would rather promote a positive than maybe ask a question that potentially does damage without testing that question to truly understand what it's doing to those that are taking it, those that are reading it. And I think that as we were talking about these indicators, that's what we were grappling with. It's like, how do we assess these things in a way that it promotes our values, it doesn't diminish our values, so, yes, that was the struggle in writing these. I completely agree. Even using the word normal. I mean, I'll be honest with you. And I grappled with multiple different words. How do you frame it for a youth's lens? So, anyways, we can evaluate this over time. And 3.6 is the last section. Social perspective taking is unchanged. % of students reporting positively, the extent to which they consider the perspectives of their teachers. And again, that's one that we can evaluate over time. There was distinct reasons why we landed there. This is I'll bridge from here to the extended study session. You can see in the targets that in the all column there, greater than 90% neutral or favorable, and it's that neutral or favorable that we're going to talk about at the extended study session. Is there a different method? Is there a better method? And then the other part is student favorable responses will be consistent with the 90th percentile of districts. So it's kind of a 90-90, 90% neutral favorable, 90th percentile. And that's for another day. Okay, developing survey questions. If you've ever developed a survey question, it is a lengthy process. And it's fascinating what your first question you write and then what it actually you end up with are two very different things. And so the key in developing survey questions are the concepts of validity and reliability. It's the accuracy and consistency of research tools. This was a visual that I had in a stats class in my doctorate program. To me, it's the best description of validity and reliability. The upper left-hand corner, you're missing the mark, you're hitting the mark, it's not valid and it's not reliable at all. The upper right-hand corner, you're generally hitting, it's valid. It's just not reliable because you're kind of all over the place. Bottom left-hand corner, you're reliable. Like it is accurate. It's just not actually measuring what you're wanting to. You're not hitting the mark. And then the bottom right-hand corner is the ideal survey test question because it's both measuring consistently and it's measuring what you want it to. And then the best example I can come up with, again, this is all from 15 years ago. So, but a faulty weighing scale, which consistently shows a weight which is 22 pounds more than the true weight, is inaccurate. However, repeated measurements of the weighing scale are similar to each other, indicating consistency in the measurement. This weighing scale is reliable but not valid. And so it's like this is the heart and soul of surveying, and why we rely so much on Panorama to do their testing, national norming, because it gives us a level of assurance that the tool we're using is actually telling us what we're hoping to understand. So that's, as I was going through the process of working with Pablo and team about writing questions, this just kept coming up for me because it's a really important factor as we do this. So as I think about creating local items, there's a few, there's like 11 different tests and actions you take to test survey items. These were a few that I think we can work on over time to create some internal validity and reliability for these questions. I think the board has already clearly defined the construct for today. Over time, you may say, we may want to define that indicator a little bit more to be more specific about what we're seeking. But I think for now, the board has done that. Expert review, there was a small team of us that were writing these. I think about experts that we have in district and through partnerships. I could see some of our parent groups, some of our internal administrative groups. I just think there's people that could read the questions and give us feedback related to them. User perspective, talking with our students, again, about these questions to ensure that how they're reading them is what we intended, and if not, what would help them reach an understanding of the intent. And then internal consistency. The internal consistency is the idea of if there are other test items or survey items that we're using that are similar, are they seeing a similar pattern in responses? And so I don't know if we have any, but if there are some, that's another way to benchmark the outcome of your survey item, is to say there's a similar response pattern with this item, with another item that is attempting to measure something similar. So those are just a few things that as we move forward with these, I think we should just pay attention to and take some of these steps. Oh, last one, that review bias and equity implications. I kind of talked about that earlier. You can analyze your bias through user perspectives and expert review. The equity implications, I think we continue to make sure that the language we use, the questions we're asking, they're not doing harm, and or they're actually building up our students. They're expressing a value. And so I think that's another opportunity we have as we're developing these. You know, and if we're asking about something that's nominal, that isn't impactful, I'm not as worried about it. But we are entering language into our students' environment, confronting issues related to ability, understanding your peers, normalizing differences. Like these are real things that our students are experiencing, and our influence on it needs to be one that's positive. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about?
Director Richter?
Oh. Okay, but you can appreciate the need to be thoughtful on those. Okay, so self-efficacy is something we've been measuring for a number of years. For monitoring, we measure spring to spring results. Our students take Panorama Survey in the fall as well. We don't measure spring to fall. It's always year over year, so that there's a consistency. And you'll see in the line charts why that is a good idea. Now, Panorama, as they were evaluating their question and looking for validity and reliability, they changed the question from spring 2024 to spring 2025, and they changed a single word. And if I'm wrong in that, someone please tell me, but it was one word that they changed. It was how confident are you to how sure are you? And it's fascinating how it changed the data, because for me, my review of the data, our secondary students were much more comfortable with those terms being synonymous. Our elementary students saw a significant decline in terms of their overall, but also the question by question responses. And so that's just, interesting. Let's see. Okay, and so here you can see, this is our, if I remember correctly, our elementary data. You can see from spring 2024 to fall 2024, it's an 11-point decline. The typical spring to fall, there's a few point decline that we consistently see. I don't have a theory about that. Well, let's say I have some ideas as to why in the fall someone might not feel as confident about their skills as in the spring, but vice versa, I could see in the spring wondering, can I cross this finish line? But you can see when that test question changed, dramatic decrease, and there was a decrease for across the board. So our data. So I'm going to start with 3rd through 5th grade. You just saw this, these data. Relatively consistent. You can see spring 23 to fall 23, 4-point drop, significant drop spring to fall, but also spring 2024 to spring 2025, a 7-point overall decline. And that really is consistent, I'll say, with change in the actual tool itself. Panorama has a data view. I'm not sure if the board has that view. It's actually not as sophisticated as what Tim and his team create, but it has one thing that we don't produce, and to me it's fascinating, and that's why I'm sharing it. Now, percentile ranking for self-efficacy for our elementary students is between the 60 and 79th percentile. On the left, you can see what is selected is all schools. I had the hardest time grappling with, are we an urban or a non-urban school? Like if there was a sort of a little bit of both, I would have selected that, but I just left the all. You can see I selected elementary and then the all free and reduced. And I wanted, so this 61% ranks in the 60th percentile of students across the country. When I select low, free and reduced lunch percent, 0 to 30%, there we go. You can see for our elementary students, that drops down to the 40th percentile. It isn't part of the tool that I think I've ever talked with my team about. I don't think I've ever, I knew it was there, but I don't think we've actually talked about it. So that actually was a little bit more concerning for me when I think that's a comparison that's a little bit more like for like with Lake Washington School District. And so to me, it's something that we may need to unpack and pay attention to, because moving from the 60th to the 40th percentile, using just one change in, now, there's some other data that we would have to understand, like how many districts are reporting, like what does that actually mean? But I think it's an important factor that we just pay attention to that. It's data we have, so seeking some additional information is a good idea. The other thing that this does, and you actually have this in your board reporting, gifted status. Some of these are not surprising at all. I'm a gifted learner and I believe in my abilities. English isn't primary language spoken at home, or it's my second, third, fourth, or fifth language. Nonetheless, if I'm qualified as a multilingual learner, I'm less likely to believe in my abilities to accomplish my goals. Student grade levels. It's interesting. Like as students progress through the system, their belief in themselves increases. I think that's a net positive. That isn't true once we hit secondary, but for our elementary students, and then by race, again, similar. You overlay reading scores, overlay various outcome measures. You see the same disparities, I'll say, in self-efficacy as you do in those other areas for certain populations. Okay, secondary. I also put the number of responses. That's something that we've worked really hard on. 6,900 responses for 3rd through 5th grade. About 2,000 students per. That's, almost, it feels like almost 100%. I know it's not, but it's quite a few. 12,000 responses, 6 through 12. Okay, same visual as I shared with you on elementary. But what's interesting is the overall changes aren't as dramatic for secondary. And to me, that indicates there's a comfort with the terminology in the question item different than our elementary students. So you can see here there was a spring to fall decline, and probably a greater decline than what you see in other years. But nonetheless, if you go, spring to spring or spring to fall, it's actually not that big of a change, especially introducing a new test item. That puts our secondary students between the 40th and 59th percentile. This is, again, this is for middle schools because the tool didn't allow me to select middle school and high school. So this is specific to middle school. This is the all at the 70th percentile. When we look at free and reduced between 0 and 30%, that reduces to the 50th percentile. Now, what it also doesn't allow is you can see this 55% remains constant for both middle school and high school. It doesn't let me disaggregate that down. So these are just the cautions with the data. Okay, and then when we look at high school, 55% is at the 90th percentile, and even compared to peers in that 0 to 30% free and reduced, it remains at the 90th percentile. Again, I have some additional questions that we may be able to answer with our taking of the data and putting them into our data system, but I don't know if we'll be able to. But I found that fascinating, some of those changes. Again, similar pattern as to our elementary students, our secondary students, for students that have identification as gifted, identification as a multilingual learner. The elementary student gender wasn't reporting accurately. That's why I didn't share it. For the secondary, it was reporting accurately. Again, I don't know if that's we're not collecting or we're collecting it differently or reporting it differently, but it just seemed it had like females and then almost like an error code next to it. So I didn't even bring it. But you can see here, this is again consistent with what we've heard from, as we talk to and think about our students related to gender, students identifying X as gender, their belief in this and some other categories consistently is lower. So it's consistent here as well. Again, student grade levels, and this is something that we've seen over time as we've reported self-efficacy. There's it kind of grows and grows through elementary. And, I'm amazed that our 8th graders, good on them, but then, the reality of high school in a future kind of hits, and in that declines, and kind of that 10th and 11th grade is where we see kind of the lowest reporting of self-efficacy, with a bump up again in senior year. So that's just interesting. Same pattern with race ethnicity that you saw with our elementary students, almost like to a group. Okay. So that's just the overall, that's like the data view inside of Panorama, which I found somewhat fascinating. This next set of data is also found inside Panorama. I'm going to walk through elementary a little bit differently than I will secondary, because I want to go question by question a little bit more specifically, and so I won't have the drop down. So question 1 for self-efficacy, and it's the same question for elementary as it is for secondary, states, how sure are you that you can complete all the work that is assigned in your class? And so right now, and again, remember, this is spring 2025, and comparing to spring 2024, there was an 8-point drop in students reporting confidence. And this 68 is related to these two categories: quite confident and extremely confident. Okay? And so that's the first question in the bank that then relates to the overall self-efficacy score. The next question: when complicated ideas are presented in class, how sure are you that you can understand them? Again, an 8-point drop, but you can see here the overall percent reporting favorability is significantly less than that first question, with many students in that neutral category. 10% more in that neutral category. Now, what you would see in board monitoring would almost be the same, because we report neutral and favorable. Now, yes, a slight difference between the two. 4-point difference, but it's not a 14-point difference that you see here in favorability. Next question: how sure are you that you can learn all the material presented in your class? 74% of our elementary students believe that they are sure that they can learn all the material presented in their classes. I think that's a pretty strong response. With you can see here in monitoring, you would see that as a 94. And so the tells a little bit different story when you look at it this way. Next question, how sure are you that you can do the hardest work that is assigned in your classes? Now, I believe, if I remember correctly, this is the lowest of all of the question items, with slightly confident having the highest, if it's favorable, non-favorable response, I think, of any of these test questions. Let's see if I'm correct. Yes. And so the last test item, how sure are you that you will remember what you learned in your current classes next year? 62% of our elementary students say, or they respond favorably, that they're quite confident or extremely confident. And you can see here in shaded, those are some significant reductions with this question about doing the hardest work, having the largest reduction in overall scores, and which then it fascinates me, the little elementary mind, how the word how confident are you to how sure are you? Are they understanding it better? I have to believe that that's why the question was changed, that confidence communicated something different, but actually asking them, how sure are you that you can do the hardest work? They're telling us, well, it's much different than I told you before. So I think that's it's just interesting information. So that was our data related to self-efficacy through fall of 2025 comparing to fall of 2024. Spring 2025 to spring 2024. But then I also looked at our fall data. Thank you. Just making sure I'm keeping track of what I'm telling you. As I went through these, very similar, I'll say, pattern of the data through all of these different, ways of looking at student groups, including grade by grade. And then this is looking at spring 25 to fall 25. So this is using the same survey item. So asking students, how sure are you? And you saw the spring to spring decline, and then our typical spring to fall, there's an additional decline. And so, you can see where we were at 68 with the first question, we're at 65. You go down to this one, you can see how sure are you that you can do the hardest work that is assigned in your class. Like, our students are telling us they're not sure that they're able to do that with this, with the bottom two non-favorable responses having the highest out of any of the questions. And so now, again, we don't have data that compares question by question to other students, but this can tell us a story about our students. We also don't have national percentiles to understand how does this 45 and this 41 compare to other student groups, but just from as an educator, as a parent, as a superintendent, it's like that's not how I want our students feeling. And I would imagine of all of the test items, that is bringing our overall score and percentile ranking down pretty significantly. So again, unpacking these was helpful from a perspective of understanding of all of the areas that we're asking our students about related to self-efficacy. Where are we seeing the greatest variance or deviation from, I guess, the overall test items? So that was kind of my takeaway from looking at these. Okay, jumping into secondary, again, these are the same questions that were asked of our elementary students. And when I go spring 2025 to spring 2024, you can see the decline. The survey tool was changed, and so you can see overall. But what's interesting is our secondary students have a different question that they're reporting as their lowest. And it's how sure are you that you will remember what you learned in your current classes next year? 36% of our students responded to that favorably. And again, I'm not here to tell you why, but just as I unpacked this data, I thought there was some really fascinating elements in the data. Now, our secondary students, yes, higher than our elementary, but relatively, again, it's a pretty low score. How sure are you that you can do the hardest work that is assigned in your classes? And so kind of interesting changes. As we look at spring to fall, again, you can see here, student grade level, like this is a similar shape to the data, even though our, it's actually a little bit higher in some areas and lower in others, but generally it's the same shape as the other data for our secondary students. When we look spring 2025 to fall 2025, I just think our secondary students responded to that change differently than our elementary students. And so what we typically see as a decline in spring to fall, our students actually are coming into this school year feeling more positively about their ability to accomplish their goals than I would say historically in the fall. And so, but again, there's some data here that are just really, I think, resounding that we should pay attention to, particularly that last question. How sure are you that you'll remember what you learned in your current classes next year? What a fascinating question to ask our students about that, because you can see there's a lot of students that are just in that neutral category. And if we were to report this to the board, this number would be north of 70 some odd percent. And so I'm not trying to tacitly argue one way or another neutral favorable, because I think there's some benefits in understanding what neutral means, but I think there's probably some benefit in unpacking the data maybe a little bit differently, because if it's the board's role to evaluate, going maybe one step deeper, I found this very helpful to go through. So, okay, so that's some of the data. Any comments or questions that the board would have?
I'll throw out that fall data is really interesting, because I was wondering, when I think of that, how confident are you that you will remember what you learned in your classes next year? And when I think about a 7-period day, and we've talked about the shorter number of hours that you have per class, sort of the cognitive or the context switching that's inherent in managing 7 classes. I was curious whether going to 6 periods we would actually see an increase in students feeling like, hey, I have actually more time to learn this stuff, and not just sort of get through it and move on to the next thing. So, I mean, obviously that's an early data point, but it's, and really across the board, seeing that increase. I'm sure you could dig into and understand, because that's 6 through 12, so did we see more at the high school level? But yeah, so not claiming victory, but that's where my mind jumped to, looking through some of that data and feeling like something may have shifted between last spring and this fall. Any other questions, comments? No? Moving on to strategies.
Yeah,
Totally blowing up the high school day.
Yes. The first time we received Panorama data, maybe not the first time, but I'll just call it the first time, and we had our self-efficacy data, we all kind of looked around the room and said, what in the world? And from that point, our schools have been actively working on and thinking about how do we help our students and their belief in themselves. Like that's been and so I asked Pablo to, kind of do some digging around just to provide some of the different strategies related to self-efficacy that our schools are engaged in. I think there's some department level work as well that's going on. And so just to kind of share some of the information in the school improvement plans, I know you would see some of that as well.
Pretend I know nothing about this and remind me when we started using Panorama and just the history of that. Like, pretend I know nothing about it because my knowledge is spotty.
Yeah. Let me see if I can. I believe spring 2022 is probably an accurate timeline of when we brought it in. Maybe it was a couple years before that. Matt is shaking his head yes, and he'll give us an exact date. We didn't do the full battery the way we do today. We kind of started with some smaller test items. 2018. And so, yes, we used it during COVID. Thank you. I gave a 5-year window to something that was 12 years today, so my timelines aren't always accurate. So yes, so 2018. But the full test battery we haven't been doing it since 2018. So I asked Pablo to pull some information together to share with the board tonight around strategies because, yes, here's the data. Yes, there's some things that I think we can dig into differently operationally, and there's a lot of good work going on right now related to this.
Thank you. So as Dr. Holman had mentioned, I reached out to some of my colleagues and then did a little scraping is the word that I'll use on school improvement plans. And some of the points that my colleagues had brought to our attention were we had multiple LEAP sessions all of last year that dealt with student self-efficacy, including interactive instructional practices that our teachers could engage in that helps increase that sense of self-efficacy. One of our colleagues pointed out to a PLC, professional learning community, activity back in the spring that dealt with social emotional learning as well as learning standards and provided an ability for educators to practice their ability to set benchmarks, problem solving, self-efficacy for our students. And so again, that was just something that was part of a trend that was followed last year in terms of professional development. Then if you can go to the next slide. Our counseling department, they actually presented to this board earlier in the fall, has also developed a comprehensive school counseling program. And within that, what they're trying to do is, still focus on social emotional learning, but also tying in those self-efficacy skills with academic achievement. And so you can see there that district-wide, we're looking to align our counselor program to student needs and in using Panorama as the data in order to do that, strengthening the collaboration between grade levels and subject areas on social emotional skills as well as academic and college and career readiness. And the last piece is our counseling department. They're besides the plan, also developing themselves in terms of their practices so that they're continuing to align those skills on social emotional learning with academic preparedness and self-efficacy. Go to the next slide, please. And so, before I go into school improvement plans, are there any questions on the two previous slides? Okay. And so I went into this year's draft of school improvement plans, and I had my very good friend ChatGPT. By the way, there is a 30-file limit to what you can throw at ChatGPT, in case you're wondering about that. And so I had to do it in pieces. And I asked it, can you give me just trends that you've picked up on in terms of self-efficacy across these school improvement plans? One of our schools actually used the term self-efficacy. That's why you see a 1 on there. However, our other schools sort of use proxies at self-efficacy, so emotional regulation, sense of belonging and connectedness, student data and teacher connectedness. These were the areas that they were focusing on a local level that get at student efficacy. So that's our elementary school level. You can go to the next one. For middle school level, you can see the wording there talks about executive functioning, culturally responsive practices, subgroup disparities, family messaging, belonging, student-teacher connection, emotion regulation, adult support and responsiveness. These are the areas that they're focusing on locally at the middle school level to get at student efficacy. And then we go into high school. High school improvement plans use terms such as belonging, student-teacher connection, attendance and tardies and chronic absenteeism, as well as student voice to get at student efficacy. So then I pulled out specific examples from schools. I didn't name the schools, but they are specific school examples. So if you look at an elementary example, self-efficacy is identified as a need-based. Again, they quote Panorama survey as well. Their SIP explicitly connects self-efficacy to growth mindset, perseverance, resilience, SEL programming. You go into middle school, self-efficacy is a focus area with outcomes tied, again, to the Panorama survey. The plan defines self-efficacy, explains why it matters for learning persistence, outlines staff professional learning, classroom implementation expectations. So they take it from professional development through to the teacher moves that are happening in the classroom that help promote student self-efficacy. And then the high school example talked about engagement, student participation, school participation, focused on student self-efficacy. The school also had groups that they wanted to focus on, like multilingual learners, like Hispanic students, and they were pointing back to the data that they had, which was there were attendance gaps within amongst that student population, and there were lower sense of belonging scores on Panorama. And then the last one, this slide doesn't do it justice. It was a 2-page report that Dr. Shannon Hitch had provided us, and you'll see it in a board brief shortly, just talking about our transition center and how very proud they are of the work that is happening there that very much relates to student efficacy. So if you look at the top right corner, in terms of student development focus, it talks about life and social emotional skills, building for independence, self-determination, independent living, interpersonal social skills, so forth and so on. And then I love that bottom left quadrant. It talks about what self-determination includes: choice-making and decision-making, problem-solving, goal-setting and attainment, self-advocacy, self-awareness, self-management, and self-efficacy. I mean, all of those words. Again, this slide doesn't do it justice, but it very much talks about the sentiment of all means all. This is the living embodiment of that all means all, and how self-efficacy is something that we're promoting amongst all of our student populations.
Another thing that we talked about today in cabinet, or maybe Pablo and I were talking about it. You think of the professional learning related to instructional practice is all about the development of the whole person. And if you're a whole person learning about problem solving and resiliency, and you can make decisions for yourself, these are ways that you build up students to then have a belief in themselves. If the only thing you're asked to do as a student is rote memorization, produce it, it doesn't build that sense of self. As I think about building thinking classrooms, you walk into a classroom that is using that strategy well, students have a sense of ownership in the work that they're doing. And ownership translates into a belief that I or we can do this work together. And so just from an instructional standpoint, it's the curriculum we're adopting. It's the practices we're asking our teachers to use. It's our instructional framework. It's so many different elements. So it isn't just one thing that is going to help our students believe. It's everything. And that's why, as Pablo was talking about that, it's so many different areas that need to be thought of as we want to build our student self-efficacy. So happy to take questions or comments. I know it's a little bit different than our progress monitoring for our other two policies.
Director Richter.
How do you tease apart, or how are you looking at the difference between self-efficacy, the belief of the students in themselves to do great things, versus some of those questions I could see being a little more self-realization, like we know learning gaps over the summer are a thing. So if students, this is just an example, you don't have to answer about this particular one, but if students are saying, oh, I'm not so sure if I'm going to retain that over the summer, is that a belief in themselves, or is that a flag for us to know about, that we should look into that? You don't have to answer on that one. Please don't answer on that one. But just what are you thinking in general about these questions, and which thing they point to, that realization of their environment or their own sense of how effective they are?
So I have to believe that through the testing of the questions, it went back to their belief in themselves. My guess is if the question was worded a little bit differently, it might be more about the system than themselves. That doesn't mean there aren't things we can do to try and shore up those gaps from the systems perspective, but if honing in on self-efficacy is so important, which I think the board's policies, I believe the board thinks it's very important. It's like, why? What does belief in yourself do? I think belief in yourself means you probably also believe that there's others that believe in you, that there's others that have confidence in you. Why is belonging connected to self-efficacy? Well, if I walk into a space and I don't feel welcomed or valued or that I belong, why am I going to believe in myself being successful? And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's like all of this is so interconnected that trying to parse it out is a little bit challenging. And that's why it feels like, environmentally, like OE10 is really important in this because the environment matters a tremendous amount, and I think also influences and impacts self-efficacy. So I don't know if I answered your question totally, but that's...
I asked how you were thinking about it, so you did.
Can I add one thing? If you remember the school improvement plans, the themes that showed up at the local level all mostly dealt with the environment, right? It was never, hey, student, how do we, quote unquote, fix you? It's how do we make the environment such that you're able to thrive and have an increased sense of self-efficacy?
Director Meekhoff.
This is a comment over a question, but I've been sitting here, I don't know if anyone else is marinating on this, that, you know, our result of 55% of self-efficacy in the high school is in the 90th percentile. You know, because I'm wanting that number 55 so much higher, you know, and then I'm seeing that it's in the 90th percentile, you know, compared to the national data set. Yeah, that's surprising to me and disappointing.
We debated in cabinet today about bringing some video clips from when the prior board landed on the SEL benchmarks as the basis for results 3, and Director Carlson at the time actually had some very intuitive and insightful comments around youth and data and perspective that it was actually really interesting, and it was related to that. And so I'm not going to try and parrot what he said, because I'm not sure any of us would ever be able to accomplish that. But it was insightful related to that. And when I think about 45% of high school students across the country don't have a belief in themselves and their ability to accomplish their goals, that's a really tough thing to stomach. So
yeah, and it was really interesting because to split out middle and high school, because we don't do that actually in R3. They're all in terms of the percentile. And so seeing that delta, it's just putting a finer point on these conversations that we've been having for a couple of years now around self-efficacy and sort of where do we where do we want to focus, or where's the opportunity for the most improvement? Yeah, and yeah, it is sobering to see, and I understand. I mean, high school's tough, you know, just some of the pressures that I see here, and it sounds like that's across the country too. You know, I think of Sarah at our last study session saying, you know, I feel like I'm behind because I'm only taking 4 APs right now, and that you know, just the environment, and yes, what's being put on kids, some of which is sort of within our control as the adults in the system to change, but some of which is much of which is very much coming in from the outside. Any other questions, comments? If not, we can move on. I will now entertain a motion to accept the progress monitoring report for R3 as presented.
Okay, fine. So moved.
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Richter to accept the progress monitoring report for R3 as presented. Is there any further discussion? All right. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the superintendent report. Dr. Holman.
Well, I first want to say thank you to our Lake Washington School District community for their continued support. We had 2 renewal levies on the February ballot, and our community said yes to both. And not only is that honoring for our school district, our staff, but it also tells us a lot about what our community values. And a strong public school system is something that our community values. And so these renewal levies truly do allow us to continue exceptional experiences for each learner. That is something we strive for, and you know, their belief in our work, I think says a lot. And so these didn't squeak by. For our EP&O and capital projects levies, both passed with over 63% approval. And to try and put that into context, I think is also a good idea. I asked our business office for historical data, and they had it at their fingertips. And so, but I put this chart together, so you can blame me if you don't like it. And so it goes back to 1998. And you can see back in 1998, we received almost 70% approval on what back then was called our M&O levy, maintenance and operations. It then changed to educational programs and operations, but it's the same operational levy that funds our, the district budget, if you will. That was early in the days of a capital projects levy. And I don't remember when our first was, but I would imagine it was somewhere around that time. And you can see there's a little bit of a hesitancy there in terms of the difference between the operation levy versus the capital projects levy, a 6-point difference. And you can see, and back then we ran our levies every 2 years. So 98, 2000, 2002, and so we were running them more often. You can see in, I think that's 2006, was when we had our highest approval for our capital projects. And then in 2018, you can see that was the lowest approval that we had for both EP&O and capital projects. That was right after McCleary. There's a lot of questions about funding for schools. There was a lot of misinformation. There was some truth in terms of the state increasing, property taxes on the state side. So there was just a lot going on. You can see the dip in 2010. That was the kind of recession-ish time. School districts were cutting budgets. I think community families, economically were having a harder time. But from 2018 to 2026, you can see the support for our levies has consistently increased to where we are bordering on some of the highest passage rates that we've ever had in Lake Washington. And so a couple of things. One, thank you to our voters. Thank you to our community. Thank you to those that wanted us to come and provide information to them. I thoroughly enjoyed having the chance to just go and meet with community members, PTAs. What I love about it is, yes, it's a levy presentation, but there's always so much more that comes out of it. But also this board's evaluation of what to put on the ballot. That was multiple meetings, multiple discussions, a lot of data requests to land on what this board felt was what was right for this school district. And I know even when the board made the decision, you wondered, did we make the right decision? It was that complex. And so I appreciate you grappling with that, because I think people see the work you do. In terms of that evaluation, it was out in public. You could go back online and watch it. And so that's a big deal. And so our community said yes. And so what commitment do we make to our community? Transparent budgeting practices. We do this work in the open. We do it in public. We post our work to make sure that our community understands that how we do our work. Actually, I don't think we've put voice to this in a board meeting yet. We won the Meritorious Budget Award for the 9th year in a row. We're the only school district in the state of Washington to achieve that status. That's a commitment to a different type of budgeting that is much more accessible than the state format for the budget. That will use our levy funds to impact student outcomes. that these aren't here for fluff. They're not here to play with. These levy funds that our community has approved are to impact student outcomes and experiences. That's a commitment that we make. Partnership and planning, partnership with this board, doing that planning, not behind closed doors, but sharing with the public when we can, asking for feedback, and just being upfront about that. And just the idea of being fiduciaries, like the greatest of responsibilities is using our community's resources well and doing it with integrity. And so I just feel like that's such an important part of this. And so thank you to our community. That ends the positive part of the presentation. I think this is also a demonstration of a broken system, because I also think like these are defined as enrichment levies. Levies that communities can approve to enrich and enhance the program of basic education. And so I asked myself how much of the local levy dollars that were just approved across the state served to fund the state's obligation to basic education. And I don't know the exact number, but I know it's certainly more than it should be. If we just take our program of special education, that's $22 million. That we already know, and we could go down the laundry list of activities, programs, staffing, cost of a staff member that are just woefully underfunded, that our community so graciously continues to say, yes, we want better in our school district. And so looking at statewide results, 126 schools, and I had broken system on all of these slides, and I took it off because that sounded too negative, but 126 school districts went out for renewal levies to cover the state's paramount duty. Yes, some of it is enrichment, but so much of it goes to just fund the program of basic education. 121 of those EP&O levies passed, providing $6.9 billion in local funding for public schools in the state of Washington. That's a lot of money that communities across the state have said yes to, because the state of Washington believes in public education. Like I truly believe that's what this continues to tell us. And I'll end with some interesting data. The Benge School District passed their EP&O levy with 82.5% approval. They had 14 yes votes and 3 no votes. Uncle Bob, Uncle Tom, and Mary Lou said no this time around, but next time they promised that it's just, you think about, we had the same type of vote that school district did, and they had 17 people participate. And if I remember correctly, they raised $72,000 over 2 years. And that's going to improve the program and opportunities for kids in their school district. The McCleary School District, which is not McCleary the lawsuit, McCleary was a family, not a district, they passed their EP&O by 5 votes, 395, I guess 4 votes, someone mentioned earlier today, because you need 50 plus 1, so by 4 votes technically, 395 to 390. While the Kittitas School District failed their EP&O by 15. So it's just a lot of data packed into this whole thing, and our commitment is to continue to advocate on behalf of the legislature's responsibility, advocacy related to our understanding of the legal responsibility that the legislature has to amply fund public education and to advocate for common sense priorities, such as House Bill 1796, which could save taxpayers money in a number of school districts across the state. And I look forward to the Senate Education Committee passing that out of their executive committee tomorrow, and the Senate Ways and Means Committee passing that along to their so that they can exec that bill to get that on the Senate floor so that they can pass that common sense legislation. So anyways, ultimately it's a thank you to our community, but it's a thank you, and I just want more for the system. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. The next item on the agenda is school visits and community affairs. This portion of the business meeting of the board is an opportunity for any board members to inform and provide updates from school visits or from organizations or groups they engage with on behalf of LWSD. Are there any updates from the board? I did want to mention that Director Yoakum and I are participating in a program called Leadership WASDA, which is, we've got 14, right, board directors from across the state, mostly Western Washington, but all over the place in Western Washington. From Mount Pleasant School District, which is 72 students, up to obviously Lake Washington with over 30,000. So a huge range of perspectives. So we were down in Olympia about a week and a half ago, for sort of its Thursday evening into Friday during the day. We had the opportunity to do some learning around leadership. Shocker, I know, but the theme for this session was leading to learn on the first day and then leading to educate. So we talked about wicked problems, polycrises, really big problems that require adaptive leadership, working together, collaboration, complex problem solving, inclusion and equity, a lot of different values there. And then we went to the state capitol on the Friday morning we had a chance to talk with Representative Berg, who's from sort of Everett Way and is working on the sales tax bill that we were talking about earlier, and sit in and actually watch the proceedings on the floor, which I had never actually seen on the House floor, and just do some learning around advocacy and so on with Logan Noel Andreas, who is the lead for strategic advocacy for WASDA. And then also talked about sort of leadership values is how we finished that session. So this is the first of 5 sessions that we'll be participating in between now and the last one is an annual conference in Spokane this November, in different places in the state, different topics and so on. But yeah, it was a really enjoyable couple of days to network across the state, do some learning together, and yeah, all of that. Anything, did I get that all? Anything else to add?
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
I have nothing to add.
Very good. The next item on the agenda are board member committee updates. Do any board members have updates they would like to provide? Director Richter.
I just remembered there was a sustainability advisory committee meeting. I can find my notes real quick. But if someone has something to do while I'm finding them, give me a moment. I'll wing it.
Go for it.
So the Sustainability Advisory Committee met online. The last couple have been online. And there was a discussion of topics surrounding the upcoming sustainability action plan that will hopefully come to our group, I hear, on March 23rd, a month from today. There's some things that have come up on that committee while I have been a member, not a board member liaison, that are very hush-hush. We're not supposed to share them. So I feel like I have this secret inside knowledge that I'm not going to share with you guys because it's privileged. If I think of more, I will come back. But yeah, looking forward to March 23rd.
I have the agenda for the meeting, and then you hit everything that was on it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Actually, I forgot. Sustainability Ambassadors started the meeting, actually. If anyone is familiar with Sustainability Ambassadors, they're a local organization that mentors high school and middle school, if they want students to do action projects in our schools and tell a positive story about them. It's very much about storytelling as well as action. And they gave a presentation on their carbon commute count, some other projects they were working on. So I always enjoy hearing from students who are very passionate about sustainability.
There are any other updates? Just real quick, Director Meekhoff and I attended Community Connectors last week, and that group continues, at least through this session, to have just questions around immigration enforcement and how that impacts our schools. So there was a lot of really great conversation around that. A couple of things to bring forward. Scott Emery, who heads up that group, is working on potentially incorporating the WASDA model policies 4300 and 4300P, which is a procedure, which is around immigration enforcement in schools. So those have been adopted. I know Issaquah's adopted that policy and looking to whether that's something we want to incorporate here. That would be admin policy, so not board policy, just for clarity. And just it was really fascinating to hear Scott talk about just really the depth of the work that he's doing in this area and the number of connections he has to other departments throughout the district, really in service of that. Like, this is not solely a safety and security thing. It's not solely a equity and family engagement thing. It's really comprehensive work across a lot of different aspects of our system. And it really just sunk in for me listening to that conversation. Just a lot of work that's going on very much with our students and our families at the center of it. So appreciate all of that. If there's nothing else, the board is going to meet next for from March 13th to the 15th for our annual board retreat extended study session. And then we'll meet next in this room on March 23rd, 2026 for a 5 p.m. study session and a 7 p.m. board meeting. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the February 23rd, 2026 board meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Meekhoff that we adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye. Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 10:39 p.m.